Masato begins the story bone-tired from his job. Endless overtime as an office employee drags him home drained each night, where he collapses on the sofa and wonders if this exhausting routine will define his next 40 years. By his second year, he'd landed a spot as an on-site engineer at a corporation. A crushing mountain of work dragged him into inescapable unpaid overtime. Draconian rules chain every employee, and his too-relaxed boss just fans the flames of a toxic workplace. One by one, the workers keeled over from crushing exhaustion, wound up in the hospital, and the boss, enraged, slashed their wages. Outside work, Masato is blasted by scorn for not having a better job. It was the only company that would take him, and day by day, he forged himself to endure the punishing grind. His sense of purpose drains from him, fading a little more with every heartbeat. He clings to a tiny ritual, pouring a small drink into each plant every day, a gardening hobby he grabbed in his first year at the company when he hit rock bottom. Now a burning purpose fuels him, driving him onward. One night, utterly drained, my energy sucked dry after work. He freezes, riveted by a TV ad that fills the screen with smiling farmers harvesting their crops. They've poured their joy into him, and he's sprinting to plant a tiny garden at home to capture that same happiness. And now he spots one of his fruits. It's teetering on the brink of ripeness. He locks onto a cherry tomato streaked with strange markings, stomach flipping with hungry curiosity. What will it taste like? Panic lanced through him. He feared the plant was sick and could infect his other plants. On a sudden impulse, he snatches the odd tomato, stuffs it into his mouth, and gulps it down. He freezes, the question, "Why did I do it?" tearing out of him as his mind goes blank and his awareness slips away. Panic tore through the crowd. Everyone feared it was poisonous or that it had taken effect instantly. Before your brain can catch up, darkness devours everything. He jerks awake to a sky of leaves. He's in a forest, not at home or in a hospital. A blazing status window hovered to his right, stamping his full name, a brand new job title, a cascade of stats, a list of skills, and a blunt note that he'd eaten a reincarnation fruit. Every stat stubbornly clung to 5, turning him into a glaringly lopsided anomaly. His job flipped him from suit and tie desk jockey to sunburned farmer, and bewilderment seized him. A lightning strike of truth shatters his mind. He's been reborn by that automato. At first, he accuses the fruit of fooling him, convinced it's only a hallucination. To prove it wasn't a dream, he strides to a tree and rams his head into the bark. He waits to jolt awake, but searing pain greets him, and he tells himself it's a fluke. He slams his head into tree after tree, over and over, until the pain shreds him and he finally yields, forced to accept this is his reality. He erupted from the ashes, reborn. He jerks to a halt as a tiny girl, no bigger than his fist, pops into existence grinning up at him. He slammed to the ground, jolted into shock, as she rocketed toward him with breathless excitement. He couldn't tell if she was a doll. She snarled she'd slam the reincarnation tree onto him before he could even answer, and a cold, robotic voice in his head intoned he didn't have to try to stop it. Confirmation slammed home. The tiny girl is a dryhead, and now she's their companion. A jolt of vitality surges through him, his energy snapping back, bewildered. He yanks open his status window and freezes, stunned by what flashes on the screen. All of Masato's stats quadrupled, and raw power tore through his body, every nerve screaming with the change. The numbers weren't pretend. They slammed into him as proof. This wasn't a dream or hallucination. He had genuinely been reincarnated. In that heartbeat, the Dryad christened him the reincarnation tree and beckoned him to follow her. He blurted to her, confused, "I'm nothing like that, I only ate a fruit." They bore the sickly color of a tomato. Before he could even register it, more Dryads swarmed in, pulled by the first Dryad's cry and the pulsing presence of the reincarnation trees sent at him. They swarmed him, whoops and cheers exploding as they crowded in to greet him. His system detonated into a storm of notifications, each one blaring that he'd snagged every Dryad in your purchase. Masada checked his status window and staggered as his stats blew up into exponent form, so massive he realized he'd tamed exactly 112 Dryads. Each one quadrupled his 5 core stats, blasting the numbers clean off the charts. He crunched the numbers in his head, then shrugged and tossed the explanation aside, no use dragging everyone through the messy math. No one, not him, not anyone, could likely grasp it. He clawed through the chaos, trying to make sense of everything. Masato branded it a hallucination for now, ripped open his status window, and hunted for any allies who could help. He noticed a flight skill that, propped up by his absurdly high intelligence stat, would blast him into orbit the moment he used it. Only 10 MP pulsed inside him, blowing them all could kill him. Hunting for a safer approach, I froze as a dragon ripped open the sky. Danger seared through him. He sidestepped on instinct. He ducked at the last heartbeat. The attack ripped through the grove, scattering the dryads, yet they stood strangely unhurt. Confusion clawed at Masato. He locked eyes with the dragon as it lunged straight at him. Its chipped claws screamed the truth. The sneaky attack had backfired, injuring it far more than him. It ignited a daring plan: ride the dragon straight into human civilization. First, he had to forge a way to negotiate. The dragon flung its jaws wide to summon a scorching inferno, and Masato's mind slammed into action. Could he stop it? He ripped open his skill list and locked onto two answers: barrier and spell break. A roaring confidence hit him. His current powers could snuff the dragon's breath. Backed into a corner, Masato hurled spell break at the dragon, which let out a startled, rumbling growl. And a dry throat croaked, trembling with stunned, impossible wonder. She could understand the dragon. He asked us. She jumped in to translate, and then, out of nowhere, something totally unexpected shattered the moment. He unlocked a brand new skill: automatic language translation. Curious what this power can do. Masato's blood ran cold as the dragon snarled that a human had dared to cancel her breath attack. Her words snapped into focus, a jolt of clarity hitting him. He could talk to her directly. He demanded, "Can you hear me? Can you understand me?" The dragon recoiled, gaping. She couldn't believe a human had just spoken her language. Masato's realization hit like a bolt. The translation worked both ways, so he blurted to the dragon, "I need a favor." He pleaded with her to hoist him into the heavens. He knew he was no negotiator, so he fired a blunt, honest plea and gambled everything on their ability to communicate to sway her. She nodded, admitting she could understand him. The dragon loomed, contempt in its gaze, and crushed the mere human's plea with a single, icy refusal. She scoffed at Masato's plea like it was a bad joke, read the incoming fiery breath, and calmly shattered it with spell break. He hailed her as a noble being and implored her to help someone in desperate need. She turned away, stone cold, slamming the door on any chance of negotiation. They ripped Masato from his search for a skill to counter a dragon. He eyed Forse for two reasons. First, he fought back, defending himself. And even if it failed, the dragon had struck first. Second, if ignored, the town he was aiming at could be plunged into danger, and all the while he was rifling through his skills. He found nanofire, but dread slammed into him. This was exactly how it was going to be. Its fearsome power could turn the dragon to cinders or swallow the whole forest in flames. He'd always reached for gentle spells, but this dire moment ripped that option away. He had no choice. He unleashed nanofire instantly. He unleashed a towering pillar of flame that punched through the clouds and skimmed the dragon by inches. The spell's humble name masked a cataclysmic fury that left the dragon reeling. Planing Masato had unleashed the mythical last atomic inferno. He wielded his blade. Masato insisted he'd only unleashed nanofire. He lacked the MP for anything that grand. The dragon roared and branded him a liar. Hearing it, nanofire still beheld the staggering scope of the last atomic inferno, an assault unleashed without a single chant. Masato had never even heard of that technique. Sensing the drag, he poured his magic straight into an advanced spell. He spotted the terror in her eyes and weaponized her misunderstanding. She held that power not born of flame could tear the world apart. Her proud stance shattered into trembling cowardice the instant his magic struck, panic roaring through her veins. Masato stared as the dragon's voice curdled into syrupy politeness, and her towering, fearsome bulk suddenly looked pathetic. So long as she could still spread her wings and soar, nothing else mattered. He asked again if she'd taken skyward, and she lit up, leaping at the chance to help. He urged her to conserve her strength. This long journey would eat her alive if she pushed herself too hard. She scoffed, tapped out that she'd cross the continent in half a day, and the Sato sagged with relief when he realized her speed matched a passenger plane. He scrambled onto her back, latched on tight, and clung as she rocketed into the sky. She tore through the sky, his hand snagged a scale and tore it loose. He lost his grip and plummeted to the earth, slamming into the ground with a thunderous crash. The dragon only registered when the thud hit her. She blurted a quick apology for not noticing sooner, but Masato, buffed by enhanced stats, didn't feel a thing, a lucky break in a bad spot, and the dragon apologized for her loose scale. Masato shouted at her to slam the brakes on Boeing before it barreled into the dryers nearby. His curiosity snapped to the scale itself, hungry for every detail. She waved him off with a grin, saying it was fine. It was already loose, dangling by a thread and seconds from dropping. She thrust the scale into his hands as an apology, smirking that it would fetch a fortune in human markets. Masato snapped it up, beaming, already scheming to sell it later then. Then he snatched the skill back and slammed the storage online. He ripped open a portal that hungrily swallowed the scale, branded it the Crimson Dragon Scale, and commanded him to chant item box to pull any stored items free. Masato and the dragon tore through the trees and burst out of the forest at last. He clung to her back as they hurtled through the sky. Eyes locked on the horizon, he spied farms clinging to the land's outskirts as he swept the area. In that heartbeat, he dared to believe this new world would finally let him seize the peaceful life he'd always dreamed of. He couldn't say why, but a fierce, inexplicable surge of power roared through him. Sim spotted a town and commanded the dragon to hover above it. She shook her head and refused, too risky. She urged them to land by the town gates instead. They did. Masato shot her a grateful thanks for the ride, and she beamed, promising she'd gladly help him anytime he needed. Hearing this, Masato's plea tore from his throat, but every path to her was gone. He couldn't reach her again. Alone, Dry stepped forward to stay with the dragon, and when he pressed her, could she still reach the others from afar? She confirmed she could. Satisfied, he let her stay as the other dryads streamed after him, the whole green world bursting with joy. After dismounting, Masato and the dryads blasted a sharp comms check, and the dragon roared back clear as thunder, message received. She vowed to return home, pressing Masato to call the instant he needed her. He swore he'd call her for help later. As she left, he spun toward the nearby town and strode forward, hundreds of dryads streaming in his wake. The dragon landed at her cave, halted at the threshold, and beckoned the dryad to watch as she tried a daring move inspired by Masato's dizzying high flight. A sudden glow washed over her, her claws unfurling into human hands as her body melted into the shape of a young girl. She snapped dryad, refusing to ask how her human transformation magic had appeared. Masato watched the town guards erupt into panic, frantically stuffing their belongings after the dragon's departure, convinced they were about to die. Realizing they'd misunderstood, he called out that he wanted to enter the town, his steady voice cutting through their fear and calming them. They demanded his family crest. Confusion slammed into him and he blurted, "What's a crest?" then rushed to clarify, "I'm not a noble." The guards gaped, having pegged him for a noble because of his speech and the way he'd driven the dragon off. They pictured a knight, and Masato couldn't help wondering if his voice truly sounded that noble. Then realization slammed into him. It had to be his automatic language translation skill. He forged his polite Japanese into the noble tongue of this world. He slipped into a casual tone. The guard declared he sounded like a commoner. It felt weird, but 1,000 times better than people calling it an ability. He shrugged them off, insisting the dragon wasn't a real threat. One burst of enemy fire spooked it, and before anyone could react, it was bearing him on its back. The revelation hit the guards like a thunderclap. A dragon had been used as transport, and a single spark of nanofire had sent it fleeing. They misunderstood him yet again. When Masato asked once more how to enter the town, they pressed a ring into his palm. They revealed it was a magical tracking talisman. You can only pry it off after you register for your guild ID. They imposed it for public order and for misado, selling it to everyone as a GPS. Thank them. Right before he stepped inside, he assumed the tiny winged dolls swirling around him were obvious. The guards blinked, baffled, and demanded what he meant. The dryads grinned, and Masato's eyes went wide as he realized they were invisible to everyone else. He stormed into town and, following the guard's tip to grab an ID, charged straight for the guild, cutting through the streets and spotting the agriculture guild almost instantly. He gaped when he stumbled on this place out of nowhere, especially after he'd once worked himself to exhaustion, and daring to believe a peaceful life might finally be his, he stepped inside. A bright-eyed young woman beamed a warm welcome and asked, "How can I help you?" Masato asked if this was the place for an ID. She nodded and said she'd collect his ring after handing him the card. They pressed him, "Are you certain about joining the agriculture guild?" And Masato's jaw tightened as he affirmed his choice. Certain it would supercharge his fresh start, he snatched the form she pressed into his hands to fill with his details. He clutched his ID, relief surging when he realized no address was required, and moments later she called his full name. They slammed the agriculture guild membership card into his palm. Curiosity flaring, she leaned in and asked which part of Shindo Masato was the surname, pinned Shindo as the last name and Masato as the first, then fired Masato. He finally admitted he wasn't from here. He came from a place where names work completely differently. Someone blurted, "Isn't that odd?" and she dubbed him Masato. Being Japanese, shyness flared whenever someone casually tossed his given name his way. She dropped the bomb. The 1,000 other guild registration fee still hung over him. She wouldn't take his ring or finalize the card until he paid, and Masato nodded, promising to hustle up the funds soon. He then brandished the dragon scale Himewary had dropped and demanded where he could sell it. Her eyes snapped wide in disbelief, wondering how he'd scored such a rare item. He smirked and said the Adventurers Guild ran like a pawnshop, trading in exactly those materials. He blurted, "What's the average monthly cost of living for one person?" She shot back that there were about 30,000 others and grinned, promising a single dragon scale would easily cover the registration fee. Masato banked on that weird exchange rate. If one other equaled 1 yen, a fat stack of cash would see him through. At the Adventurers Guild, the staff erupted into a frenzy the moment they spotted the dragon scale, snatching it away to test its dragon content before they dared appraise it. The analyzer's screen blazed, just 0.5 grams per milliliter. The readings shattered expectations. This power belonged to an ancient dragon, and the draconian level matched the dragon's rank. The crowd froze, jaws dropping. This dramatic, flaming crimson dragon was an ancient one. He zeroed in on the measurement and scoffed, 5 grams per milliliter, barely a trace. The employees erupted, shouting him down and insisting the sum was colossal. They slapped an 8.1 million ether price on the scale. Masato strode back into the Agriculture Guild to pay the registration fee and haggle for farmland, and the receptionist, reading his intent, asked him to slip off his ring and make absolutely sure they actually put land up for sale. He grabbed his arm and warned him not to rush into buying farmland. Rent cost 54,000 other per acre per year. The price to buy skyrocketed to 900,000 per acre, so they urged him to rent first. It was far more affordable. Masato grinned at renting land. It let him plant bold new crops across sprawling fields without draining his savings. He declared to the receptionist he'd go with the rental, and she asked, ready to pick a location. They slapped a booklet in front of him, each page snapping with maps of lands perfect for the season. He zeroed in on tomatoes and soybeans, the exact crops he'd grown back in elementary school. He slammed down an initial 220,000 other. Unleash a thunderous thank you to the girl for her help. She snapped, "Are you a wanderer?" and warned that a farm's work would chew anyone up who tried to run it alone. Masato swore to her that help stood with him, even if the dryads couldn't fathom his intent. They blasted through the to-do list and snagged an apartment. You pressed your palm to the cold glass, heart racing as you sketched every furrow in your head. Tomorrow you start farming. In just half a day, the life he'd dreamed of snapped into place. At dawn, he bolted out to his rented farmland, miles from the town center, but perched on the outskirts, ready to shout for help the moment trouble hit. The dragon descended. He couldn't see her at all until he switched on his enhanced vision skill. Instantly, she crystallized into sight. He locked onto her, and they greeted each other. She thanked him, gratitude burning in her chest. The dryad's invisibility spell had let her slip into town unseen. Her words hit Masato like a wave of relief. It worked. Then she snapped, "Can you write me back right now?" He soared over the farmland, hurling an illumination spell that traced glowing lines across the fields before he touched down. He asked the dragon to churn the soil at the marked spots with the special mix they'd prepared, and she roared with excitement before diving in. She ripped open a pocket with her storage magic and unleashed a choking, coal-black cloud of dust that rolled over the fields. Last night, Masato asked her to conjure his wood ash by setting a far-off grassland ablaze. A dry wit later declared it the finest ash sheet anyone had ever seen, and Masato, burning with curiosity, demanded to know why it was so good. The dry had explained the dragon's dung teemed with nutrients, turbocharging the crops into an explosion of growth Masato hadn't anticipated. He shot his arms out to begin carving furrows, but the dragon cut him off. Were those furrows the heavy, enduring ridges that marked human fields? He shoved himself forward to do it, then his eyes landed on her claws, sharp, ready, exactly what they needed. She streaked across the field with her claws, carving flawless furrows and misado. My jaw dropped. That towering behemoth handled the tiniest, most delicate work with impossible finesse. She must have maxed out her dexterity stat. I struck gold the moment I met her in this world. He barked an order to cut an even number of furrows before they broke for lunch. When the fieldwork ended, the dragon suggested they properly introduce themselves. She seethed, sick of being reduced to just dragon, or defined only by her species. Rifling through the scales she'd hoarded, Miss Otto's world snapped into place. She was the flaming crimson dragon. She flushed and confessed the name embarrassed her. She wanted a better one, and Masato blinked, wondering why she'd introduce herself if she disliked her own name. He tossed out Duraman with a cheeky grin because dragon sounded similar. She shot it down immediately, insisting she was a girl and demanding her name be cut. Shock slammed into Masato. He hadn't even known her gender, and his brain frantically flipped through girl names. When Masato finally breathed Himawari, the dragon's face crumpled with relief and then burst into bright, unfiltered joy. Her eyes lit up, the name sounded weirdly unique and she loved it, so she leaned in and asked, "What's your name?" Masato gave a crisp bow and declared, "Call me Masato," and she nodded, instantly understanding. They kept toiling in the fields. Mid-planting he froze, his dexterity stat had shot up to infinity. Curious if this meant he could hurl seeds with unerring precision, he tried it, and his jaw dropped. Every seed arced and buried itself across the field. The dryads erupted in cheers and crowned his seed throwing with a perfect score. Wary and stunned, he blurted, "How did he pull off a throw like that?" Her eyes snagged on the seat's path. Leaning in, she realized every seat was sunk exactly 20 centimeters into the floor. She couldn't believe Masato had that insane skill. Guilt burned through him for making her feel small, so he refocused and barked for everyone to start watering. The dryads vowed to wrench rain from the clouds to prove their power, so Masato placed the task squarely in their hands. They dropped to their knees and prayed. Moments later, a lone cloud boiled up over the field. Rain slammed down. Masato scoffed at its predictability, curiosity sparking over what other mysterious skills he might unearth, and he trained his appraisal skill on the cloud. The sky birthed the dryads' blessing raincloud, a one-of-a-kind cloud that appears only when dryads pray, and its water soaked the earth like life itself, enriching the soil and blasting plant growth into overdrive. Misadu gaped. He couldn't fathom a farming ability this potent actually existed. He let loose a roar of thanks for him, Wary, and the dryads, then told the dragon to head home. Worry nodded my gut as Greed waved it off and told me, "Call her anytime." They strode out of Masada, planting and watering finished, only harvesting left to do. With the harvest booming, Masada dared to imagine a peaceful life here. Nostalgia for Japanese flavors burned in him, so he slapped together the humblest dish. The world lay stripped of every staple. No soy sauce, no vinegar, no miso, no mirin, not a single grain of rice. He pondered planting soybeans to craft soy sauce and miso, then inspiration struck. He could whip up a dish right away. The next day in the mountains, Masato dove at a charging boar, knocked him cold, then scolded him, worry ripping through his voice. He slammed his palm down and snarled that he'd asked for a mountain of wild vegetables, not animals. She blinked, baffled. He handled the boars like it was nothing. They were here just to gather ingredients. He decided to whip up a savory egg custard for Chu and Mushy. Eggs were already in hand, but he needed mountain vegetables and mushrooms for the dish, so he pleaded with him, Worry nodding his voice to bring them there. His mind raced over the ingredients as he wondered if stashing the boar inside his storage skill could supercharge the meal. A flicker in a nearby tree yanked his gaze. He looked up and instantly recognized Japanese wild parsley and oyster mushrooms. Confidence surged through him, then Himawari's excited shout yanked him over. She insisted she'd discovered mouth-watering mushrooms. Masato's eyes snapped to the cluster. He knew at once they were poisonous flyaguric mushrooms. It oozes toxic compounds, evotinic acid and muslimol, ready to strike at the slightest touch. He froze, mouth agape, then snapped an urgent warning about the danger bearing down on them. Himawari, unbothered, told Masato not to fret. Memories of his towering vitality stat surged as the mushroom's surprisingly bold flavor exploded on his tongue, and Masato hesitated. Memory slammed him. Fly agaric wasn't just poisonous, it was packed with ibotenic acid. It detonated a mommy, said to hit 10 times harder than glutamic acid, and mushroom fans actually nibbled bits for the flavor before spitting them out. If you could shrug off its poison, it'd be a game-changing ingredient. Masato snapped into action to collect some. Himawari grinned and called it a smart plan, and a deadpan voice chimed that she'd found something tasty. Masato snatched the family's citrus and squeezed it, unleashing its potent aroma into the air. Perfect as a chaw and a mushy topping, it practically screamed to be devoured. He'd gathered every scrap he needed. He blurted, panic lacing his voice, "We have to head back." She eagerly volunteered to taste his dish, and Masato's grin said it all, brilliant idea. They barreled back into the city and let her invisibility lapse, sending the guards into a full-blown panic, and after Masato quelled the chaos, he turned to cooking. Ingredients stood ready: processed wild boar meat, plump oyster mushrooms, a seasoning forged by expert hands, and fresh market eggs. Citrus and wild parsley electrified the silky chawanmushi. He beat the eggs into a furious froth and boiled up 3 times the broth. They unleash alchemy to transmute any double boar parts into concentrated seasoning, then dissolve it into water to forge the broth. He whisked the broth and eggs into a silky mix in the bowl, popping every bubble until the top lay glass smooth. He shoved meat and mushrooms into the cup, then flooded it with the egg mixture until it was 80% full. No steamers existed here, so he grabbed a frying pan, poured in water, nestled the cups inside, and cranked up the heat. No foil in hand, he slammed up a crackling barrier instead. 10 minutes later, he shut off the heat, tilted the cups, and watched the liquid turn crystal clear. The dish was done. Then perch a zesty citrus slice on the rim of every cup. At last, chow and mushy complete, its silken surface trembling with steam. She climbed onto the balcony to tell him where it was ready, and he couldn't stop wondering how she'd managed to eat such a tiny portion. Her size turned the whole thing into a gamble, but Himari asked him to wait. Then she exploded into brilliant light, her magic crafting the glow into a small human girl. She draped herself over the balcony rail, eyes locked on Masato, and breathed, "How does my human form look?" He gaped, relief crashing through him as they finally tore into the meal together. "I'm worried I'll be seen as proud." They dove into their seats at the table where Masato had just served the dish. Thanks rained down on both of them just before they dove into their meal. He snatched it away before she could sink her teeth in. He urged her to squeeze the citrus on first to blast the flavor sky high. They obliged, then tasted. Masato erupted in praise. The dish was delicious, its texture flawless. Parsley and mushrooms injected a lively texture, and Himawari closed her eyes, reveling in the silky, rich flavor. Tears flooded Masato's eyes as he realized this was the exact taste he'd been craving. The moment he bit the mushroom, he froze as a tsunami of umami slammed into him, a flavor like nothing he'd ever known. A chill cracked through him as he finally grasped why mushroom enthusiasts chased poisonous varieties. He slammed a detox spell into the air, neutralizing the poison in an instant. Relief flooded him as magic let him finally savor the world's flavors safely. My eyes went wide as the poison struck him and did absolutely nothing. Worry gnawed at them, yet they kept eating and chatted happily through the rest of the meal. After their meal, Himawari exploded into praise, gushing about Masato's incredible cooking. When he asked if she wanted more, she practically leapt and cried, yes. She asked him to stash a portion for later, delight sparkling in her eyes, and Masato vowed he'd save her some next time. After seeing her off, it hit him. With a flash of creativity, he could turn every meal in this world into an unforgettable feast. The next day, with time to burn, Masato went window shopping, and his eyes zeroed in on a steak seeker he'd end up using later. Sky-high prices slapped him awake. He vowed to turn his field's harvest into his own wares and slash his costs. At that exact moment, Carol from the Agriculture Guild burst into view. He shot her a grateful grin, thanked her for the earlier help, and asked why she was here. Carol laughed and said she was out shopping for her home garden. With the guild on its day off, she jumped at the chance to shepherd him through the store in her guild staff role, laser-focused on making him succeed. Masato seized the offer with a grin, and Carol beamed. Masato's pulse raced. The world promised 1,000 surprises and mysteries to unravel, and Carol thrust a set of enchanted tools into his hands. Armed with a seed invasion barrier that slams the gate on invading weeds and a sprinkler tool that makes watering effortless. But he insisted the rain, a blessing on the parched earth, was enough. He bragged he could summon and bend rain clouds to his will. Nobody else could even see the dryads. Needing answers, he stormed out, leaving Carol reeling at his unexpected reliability. His gaze snagged a familiar can of liquid fertilizer. Confusion flared. Why was it here, in a non-industrialized city? A place where ammonia production for fertilizer has no business existing. They blurted, how was it made? Carol overheard. They dropped the bomb. The liquid fertilizers were dungeon drops, and the soldier gaped at the game-like revelation. He raved that growth enhancers, costing 5,000 other per can, ripped 5 days off crop growth on every acre. Masato's face crumpled. She leaned in and asked, what's wrong? He confessed he'd been craving a game-style instant harvest, and when Carol asked for clarification, he spelled it out. But she warned, voice cold, that enhancers were deployed only during harvest season. Masato saw their cost, bulldoze the meager benefit. Carol sneered, only rich farmers could profit from them. Spotting Masato's dragon scale, she grinned and dared him to storm the dungeon and claim the loot himself. A flash of inspiration ignited, and later the dungeon swallowed us. He slammed potent sharpening and fortitude buffs into the sword, forging a razor edge and an unbreakable blade. With only 10 MP left, magic was off the table. He had to unleash nothing but brutal physical attacks. They clenched their jaw, counting how much sweat and risk it would take to gather the growth promoters. Just then, he or she burst into view. She snapped, "Why drag me into a dungeon if you thought you could handle it alone?" Masato swore he'd treasure whatever she hunted down if it kept him safe. He even asked her to join as a reference, and that request ripped her feelings wide open. She kept thinking he was seeing her in a whole different light. Her dragon presence sent the monsters fleeing, carving a clear path for Masato, who then snarled they'd plunge deeper into the adventure if no monsters appeared, a trap Himori couldn't escape. He ripped open his status window, triggered a skill, and pictured an elevator slicing through the dungeon as the perfect shortcut. The system stamped the construction complete, and the dungeon erupted into a violent tremor. Masato and Himawari stared as the ground split open and an elevator shot up, its wires snaking to the ceiling and anchoring themselves. The door burst open. Masato's master-level architectural skill had somehow worked. He froze, worry biting at his bones and his thoughts spinning, while Masato shrugged and casually dropped that he'd built a lift. She snarled, grumbling that he was reshaping the dungeon's structure with maddening ease. They plunged down the elevator and slammed headfirst into a swarm of enemies. On the ATAF floor, a colossal bear monster reared up and barred their way. Masato snapped, "Is it stronger than me?" And I heard the cold answer, "No, it isn't." Knowing he only had a 1 in 100 shot while it rested, Masato lunged for the neck, ended it in a heartbeat, and a card tumbled free. Himori staggered back, disbelief burning in his eyes as he snapped, "What happened? What did Masato do?" He shot back that he'd struck its weak point, then pored over the card. A wavering summoning card that rips open transport gateways and harbors vast storage magic. They asked if only bears dropped it. I fired back that monsters of the same level could drop the same items. Masada's eyes darted to the crocodile monster that had just appeared. She hesitated, unsure if that's who she meant, but before she could answer, he'd already moved. He sliced the crocodile's neck with surgical precision, and she snapped that he'd been too slow and cursed when something clattered free. A tiny vinyl greenhouse, perfect for growing plants, stood nearby. Masatov's jaw dropped. He hadn't expected it to be this useful. It pulsed as if an alkyl decam mushroom could sprout from it. They were mushrooms. Himawari burst forward to explain the. He crushed the Whitandage disease, curing one of the 5 deadly epidemics. The revelation slammed into her. Her mother had it, with only 300 years left, and her hope shattered. Her voice cracked as she declared that growing alkyl decam mushrooms could save her mother. Excitement surged through Masato at the thought of cultivating them. Desperate for a growth enhancer, he lunged forward and barked, "Do those mushrooms have spores?" Himawari snapped, "They spring up everywhere but refuse to be cultivated," and Masato hissed, "Boculin and bacteria, Earth's deadliest poison." They barreled forward, and a lightning-fast mimic monster couldn't touch Masato. It spat out a dubbing card that instantly duplicated any dungeon item. Himawari scanned the battlefield. Every floor monster lay vanquished, but the growth accelerator was nowhere to be found. They plunged deeper into the 81st floor, straight into its waiting dangers. This sin squares off with the snake monster, then gets carved into sashimi in an instant. A familiar object clattered free and jolted Masato into stunned silence. A growth accelerator that could fast-forward 3 months of growth and tweak periods with a single dilution. Unlike the store version, which lets you reap whole fields in a heartbeat. Turns out I'm a glass lizard, speckled all over. Body-native glass glared down from the ceiling, and Masato fired off a question about its powers. She warned it shed explosive shards of glass-like skin. Shuddering at the thought of sword on glass, he began scheming a trap. The lizard had already spotted them, so Masato lunged into the fight and cleaved it into tumbling pieces that fell away, oddly easing the tightness in his chest. Henry Murray roared, flaunting his razor-sharp swords and the raw strength that swung them. While the monster fumbled, a glass shoe clattered free, the Cinderella Clinic, a shoe that could permanently transform anyone who slipped it on into a beautiful woman. Masada snapped that the glass shoe would morph a man into a stunning woman, not into a handsome man. Calling it useless, he spun on his heel and headed straight home. I hesitated and asked if we should push deeper. Taking the lead felt like wasted effort. Masato shrugged and said he never meant to be a real adventurer. They split outside the dungeon, wariness coiling through me as I pressed him to contact her the moment he used the vinyl house. Later in the city, Masato marched through the crowds and resolved to sell off his unused items, starting with the glass shoe. Inside the Adventurers Guild, the very clerk who'd inspected his dragon scale locked eyes with him and instantly recognized him. He crouched, eyes wide, scrutinized the shoe's shimmer, and blurted that it might be Cinderella's fabled, fleeting glitter. She pulled back to size it up, and soon Masato heard shouts erupt from the back. The staff burst back, breathless, declaring it a top-tier artifact, powerful enough to bend alliances between nobles and monarchs. She demanded where he'd found it. He grinned and said it came from the dungeon's 81st floor, and when she leaned in, pressing him for every last detail. She slammed an enchanted truth-telling relic onto the table. It flared, confirmed his honesty, and Visato staggered. He hadn't expected her to doubt him. Just then a man with an eye patch strode in. He'd caught wind of the whispers about the 81st floor. They demanded to know if Masato was the one who'd returned from the dungeon, and whether he knew about that strange new structure standing there. Masato snapped, "You mean the elevator," and explained he'd built it because lugging moments between floors was a pain. He unleashed casual, razor-sharp reasoning that stunned them, and they recoiled, furious at his outrageous actions. His breath hitched as he stared at it, agonizing over whether he should tear it away. The guild moved to fling it open to the public, and dangled a $3 million a year license fee in front of him. Masada nodded and let them use it, but worry snapped at him. Could the guild afford it? He snapped, asking them to transfer the fee and the glass shoe payment through the Agriculture Guild. A disbelieving sigh tore from him at how everything had unfolded, and as his wealth swelled, he hit the shops. He snapped open his status window. The readout had evened out. He surged into battle with a colossal 25,500 HP and 4,500 MP crackling at his command. Relief hit him like a thunderbolt as his MP surged. He could keep casting non-stop through the farming run. Later in the fields, he crouched amid the swaying grass, mind racing as he schemed how to unleash the growth accelerator. The Dryads stepped forward, hands a blur as they brewed it to perfection, then told him to pour it into the rain clouds. And to his shock, jagged inlets yawned into it. He poured anyway, without asking why, as water-laden clouds rolled over the fields. The enhancer poured from the sky, and saplings shot up so fast it felt like the world had been slammed into fast-forward. The plants shot sky-high and needed support, so Masato seized gravity itself and pinned them upright when there were no support pillars. The plants ripened into plump, nearly ripe tomatoes, soybeans, and edamame, wowing Misadu, who moved to harvest half the crops. They slammed a list of the Dryads' help onto the table, every entry handed over with eager, willing hands. He bought stout pillars for the tomato vines and pressed Dryads into service to brace the plants as he hammered each post into the earth. The Dryads twirled and chanted, pouring every ounce of magic into helping Masato as the growth enhancer painfully recharged over 4 grueling days. He urged them to wait, don't harvest the remaining crops yet. 4 days later, they stormed the fields and harvested every last tomato and soybean. Returning to his apartment, Masato slammed open his item box and froze at 20 tons of tomatoes, 892 kilograms of edamame, and 984 kilograms of soybeans. He lunged, unleashed his appraisal skill, and scanned them. His jaw dropped when it revealed the tomatoes were everlasting. Infused with a potent anti-aging ingredient that froze aging after just 100 grams a week and boasting perfect flavor, the soybeans called Divine Eye Black Beans doubled your vision and unlocked the telescope skill with 100 grams weekly. Like the tomatoes, they exploded with top-tier flavor, sending the Sato reeling, eyes wide as he scrambled to grasp what was happening. He sank his teeth into a raw tomato, and the flavor exploded so wildly he couldn't tear himself away, proof it was exceptional. A grin split his face. The item box kept them fresh, so he stashed some for himself and sprinted to the guild to sell the rest. At the guild, Masato slammed his wares onto the counter, leaving Carol reeling at the colossal harvest. Disbelief ripped through him. A novice had amassed that much in a mere 2 weeks. He pinned half his success on her. Her mention of the dungeon lit the fuse. He slammed the growth accelerator he'd found into her hands. It ripped 3 months off the growth timeline. Carol's brain short-circuited. She couldn't tell if he'd said minutes or months, so she shoved the whole thing aside. They shoved every distraction aside and dove headfirst into sorting the harvest, hands a blur as they ripped through the piles. She unleashed her sorting telekinesis. Fruits and veggies rose, whirled, and snapped into tidy, floating ranks. Masato's mind leapt to one idea. The skill was sorting the crops by quality. Carol gaped as each item gleamed pristine, not a trace of disease or damage. A hunched old man shuffled up and croaked, "Are these the legendary vegetables?" He zeroed in on them with razor focus. Masato scoffed at their specialty, and the old man burst into panic. They seized him, shaking him and screaming how he'd grown them. Masato shrugged with a lazy grin and said, "Regular seeds." Carol snapped she'd escorted them to him, guiding the old man too. It hit them like lightning. A legendary Dryad fairy must have helped him, leaving Masato speechless, and the Dryad he'd brought gaping even more stunned. He fired off a joke on a whim that the dry had eased the tension, and Carol, puzzled, said dry reminds me of fairy tales. He scoffed that legendary fairies would ever befriend humans, utterly blind to the dryads standing right there. Masada grinned, sure the crop's quality sprang from the parched soil, and the blessing's power that magnified every stalk. The rain slammed into the earth, infusing the soil with nutrients and supercharging the plants far beyond normal. Carol declared Misada's produce demanded a merchant like no other. He was stunned until she slammed the truth down. Exclusive merchants kept high-quality goods apart so prices stayed fair. He discovered his tomatoes could stretch lifespans with a freakish power, and learned Misadavis crops that carried such effects were barred from being sold alongside ordinary goods. He hired an exclusive merchant, shelled out a crippling fee, and bought anonymity so deadly pursuers couldn't trace him. Masato nodded, confidence sparking, agreed, and ordered the dryads to warn him the instant any suspicious person neared his home. One dryad flashed a grin and vowed they'd handle it. The old man barked he'd already told the guild master to lock down a dependable, exclusive merchant. A hooded man named Cole suddenly stepped into view, and Carol instantly hailed him as the perfect choice. Cole boomed that he was a special traveling merchant armed with a skill called mystification, then reassured Masato he could be trusted. Masato leaned in and asked about mystification, and Carol's eyes lit up as she said it lets you dissolve into mist and slip through the world unhindered. Word spread that Cole's younger sister had a rare power, and a ruthless criminal gang zeroed in on her. And he seized several members, sparking his mystification skill to tear through his mist, break free, and sound the alarm at their base. Masato, shaken by the harrowing tale, ignited with fierce resolve. He had to help and claw his way back. They called it owning the prized goods merchants crave. He strode over, greeted Cole, shoved a thank you card into his palm. Cole's jaw dropped. Carol's voice shot up. That's the Wavern circulation card. The elder intoned that only 5 such cards existed, relics of an ancient civilization. Cole agreed this was the nation's flagship transport, unleashed only in times of national crisis. The Sato snapped, "Is that true?" as Carol warned that using it would catapult him into the history books. They sealed the contracts, bid Cole a final, aching farewell, all to keep him safe. Masato dispatched a dry head to shadow him. They carved the profits. Masato claimed 75%, Cole earned 20%, the guild got 5%, a fair split since Cole risked his neck. Right before Masato asked Carol to sell him wheat seeds, he stepped forward. Carol agreed, but was. She stared. Wheat wasn't even in season, and when she pointed that out, Masato waved it off and clung to his own idea. He stormed into his field, ready to grow whatever he wanted by pumping the soil full of potent growth enhancers. My stomach howled for tempura as I schemed to farm with the dryads. Summoning Haimwari, they yanked him into a high-stakes meeting to clear the field for the alcaldica mushrooms. First, she had to wrest life back into the withered fields, and the dryads insisted he trust their rain. They tangled Masato's thoughts, keeping him baffled until they snapped, "Watch." They ripped the sky open and unleashed rain clouds that dissolved dead plants the instant they touched them. Another dry ability burst forth. The rain shredded dead plants and shoveled their nutrients straight into the soil, so the next planting needed no compost. Astonishment seized Masato as he burst into rapturous praise for the dryads. Moments later, Worry burst in, demanding to know if he'd cleared the field. He used the item, and it shoved him into choosing a spot for the greenhouse. The tiny package shuddered, then unfurled into a sprawling greenhouse. Masato smirked at how handy it was. It practically beckoned him inside, and he demanded whether she'd brought alcaldic mushroom spores. She jabbed a finger at a nearby stone and said the spores had been scattered there. Masato froze, baffled, nothing there until she leaned in, forced him to peer, and the spores suddenly clung to the stone. Masato fired up his microscope skill and gaped as tiny alkyl decommissioned spores cloaked the stone. Seeing them everywhere, he blurted, "Should I panic or just cultivate them as they are?" And she confirmed that was the right call. He burst into the greenhouse as the system flashed a prompt asking him to confirm using the spores to grow a plant. He hit confirm without hesitation and set the stone dead center. A mechanical voice ordered him to wait outside as the greenhouse retooled its atmosphere, and in a heartbeat, the interior morphed into something entirely new. Rotting, overgrown weeds choked the air, and Masato's gut screamed. The greenhouse had turned into a blistering, high-pressure chamber of toxic gas. Hemori slammed down a verdict. It was ideal for alcaldica mushrooms. Mass Adam had to burst in and apply the growth enhancer. "I know you'll freak out, but he's going to be fine." Skeptical of her confidence, he hurled a metal drum at the entrance to test the place. He watched it flatten, then dropped to his knees as blistering heat slammed into him. Himawari's voice cut cold. No human could survive inside. Masato's jaw tightened as he plotted his next move. Himawari snapped to trigger the autoheal, warning the air was oxygen-starved and he'd have to hold his breath. He slammed autocare from his skill list to cling to life, then flicked on HP lock so his HP could never plunge to zero. Dread knots my gut. Watch him the moment he steps in and warn him to be careful. Masato stepped in and a crushing wave of dizziness slammed into him as the seething gas tore through his body's defenses as brutal heat and crushing pressure from an environment nothing like the outside ravaged him. Question ripped through him. Were his support skills and massive vitality stat the only things keeping him standing, and what would happen the moment one of them vanished? No time to spare. He had only a single heartbeat of breath left. He leveled his microscope like a sniper's scope, pinpointed the spores in a heartbeat, and tore toward the rock. He ripped open the growth enhancer, and his eyes snapped to more spores drifting nearby. They'd seemed to burn inside him from the very start. He set out to cultivate those too. After what felt like an eternity, Masato burst from the greenhouse, relief crashing over him for finally making it out. I grilled him, how long until the alcoholica mushrooms grow and fruit? She fired back, 1 year and 3 months. Masato slammed the growth enhancer into motion, and the display flashed 4 cycles, 16 days until the mushrooms ripened. They left Himawari dizzy with questions, until Masato barged in and declared the growth enhancers would rocket the whole process forward. It enabled them to heal her mother sooner, and Himawari erupted in joyous cheers. Word spread that she snatched up the last medicinal ingredients, as Masato swore he'd concoct a one-of-a-kind cure to help her mother. Meanwhile, deep in a forest cave, a frail horned woman clung to the cold rock as a raw, rasping cough ripped through her. Her ashen, gaunt face and coiling horns branded her as Himawari's mother, and soon after, Himawari and Masato race into a village perched on the rim of the coldest sea ever. Masato shot her a sharp thanks. This biting cold would give him the edge he needed for his next task. Cooking tempura, we stormed the wheat-planting dungeon and conquered it. He tore through the stalls, snatching tempura ingredients while he waited for the alcaldaka mushrooms. He peered down, spotted the seawater hidden beneath the ice, then hurled himself off as a cold wave of worry slammed back. He balled his fist and smashed the ice, the thick layer exploding into shards instantly. I watched worry freeze solid, disbelief slamming into us as the legendary unbreakable sea ice finally shattered for the first time ever. Masato snapped, "Why'd you bring me to a place like this?" She just shrugged and said the seafood was abundant. A tentacle slithered up behind him, unseen by either. Himawari blurted that no one had ever fished that sea. Before he could finish the sentence, Masato vanished. Water slammed over him as a tentacle lashed out, coiling around him and dragging him beneath the surface. Hope surged through him as he stared down at the colossal squid beneath him, its massive eye glaring up like a living spotlight. He snapped into action, unleashed flight magic, and rocketed out of the water with a tentacle still clinging to him. Dread clenched my gut as I watched a suspected monster skulk in the shadows below. The creature erupted into view. Masato barked that it was a prize, and having come this far, he vowed to haul it in. Channeling flight magic, he began hauling the enormous beast from the water as the squid thrashed and lashed with its other tentacles, but Masato ripped free and darted clear of every strike. Memory struck him, slammed the base of a squid's head, and it dropped stunned. Not sure the tactic would hold, Masato clenched his teeth and hauled the creature toward him anyway. The giant squid flailed, utterly powerless in midair. He unleashed a savage chop at the base of its skull, right above the eye, and it went out cold instantly. Masato wasted no time. He snapped a storage spell on it and shoved it away. My worry flared as it stood bewildered and suddenly fired. The squid lay half dead, still thrashing, and storage magic would reject it. It's built to swallow only the truly dead. Masato snapped that his storage had already written off the paralyzed squid as dead. The definition of death was maddeningly vague. Himawari gaped as Masato bent the very laws of storage magic. She shrank to a shadow beside him, utterly dwarfed by his presence. Masato missed the meaning behind her words. It unleashed flight magic and dove beneath the waves, the exact trick that had saved it before. He plunged into the abyss, swallowed by a writhing swarm of sea life, as schools of smelts and horse mackerel surged alongside him toward grab a few. A hulking fish erupted behind him, scattering the smaller fish into a frantic blur, and then, with a jolt, he realized it was a tuna. Catching the opening, Masato snatched his sword from the item box and blasted through the water toward it. He lunged, thrusting with pinpoint precision, seizing the tuna in an instant. He set out to catch more, then his gaze locked on a shrimp, and a sudden craving for tempura shrimp blazed up, so he lunged in to net a few. Masato shot to the surface with a bountiful haul. She gaped in amazement, and Masato agreed, then asked her for a ride to the market to have the fish processed. At the harbor market, the shopkeeper slammed the knife down and refused to process the fish, vowing loyalty to their fishing boats. Masato gave a sharp nod, pivoted, and strode off to try somewhere else. The store manager slammed a hand up, stopping him cold, and demanded to see the rest of his catch. Masato thrust the tuna he'd caught into view, and the manager and his employee froze, jaws dropping at how plump and shockingly fresh it looked. The manager swore they only sourced from trusted clients, but Masato's tunas blew their usual stock out of the water. He volunteered to process it, only if Masato let them keep a portion of the fillet. Masato leveled his gaze and asked if they were certain. The manager stepped forward, offering to scale the fee to match the amount, and Masato's relief burst into heartfelt thanks. The manager grinned, convinced Masato had struck gold. He'd uncovered a legendary fishing spot. Masato blurted that he'd landed other fish there too, and asked if they could process them. He ripped open his item box and hauled out a colossal squid tentacle. The manager stood frozen, jaw dropped at its monstrous size. Masato's breath hitched. Could his mind even process it? The manager leaned in and demanded to inspect his storage magic up close. The manager's breath hitched as his gaze locked on the giant squid. Her ears and eyes stained a ghostly bluish hue. He staggered back the moment he recognized it as a kraken, stunned that Masato actually owned a monster like that. Masato, cool as ice, shrugged and said he'd chopped it and left it paralyzed. The manager's jaw hit the floor. Was Masato even human? Masato froze, baffled by the explosive reaction. When I'm wary, sliced through the chaos to clarify the kraken was a legendary squid. The manager insisted it could be processed and practically begged Masato to let them handle it. Kraken was a rare delicacy. After a few hours, the tuna, creek, smelts, and mackerel were expertly filleted, the mackerel even done free, and Masato beamed with gratitude. Shopkeepers erupted into grateful cheers, their gratitude swelling even higher. Masato dropped the bomb. He had another task, and now Time's tug ripped them into the nearby sea. Himawari blinked, utterly baffled. They barreled into the waterfront. Masato claimed a spot, and Himawari snapped, "What are you up to?" He planted his feet against the raging surf and unleashed an advanced alchemy spell. Worry flared in my gut. Unsurprised, I thought Masato was pulling another wild stunt. Without warning, powdered grains blasted up from the ocean and slammed together into a perfect white sphere. Worry clawed at her throat as she blurted, "Is it salt?" Misadu confirmed with a baffled nod, questioning why she was so concerned. A wild suspicion leapt up. Had he really used alchemy to slash his salt bill? Masato insisted he was just avoiding carrying cash. Himawari ripped into him for treating alchemy like a parlor trick, furious that he always went overboard with the ingredients. A memory slammed into Mesa. He turned to her and asked for help with a task. Emma Worry snapped to attention and fired back, "What do you need?" Misada pressed her to harvest hops for the project. Before long, he burst back from the fields, hops in hand, the very ones he'd asked for, and she thrust them at him, demanding to know his next move. Knowing the Sato, she braced herself for another reckless, all-or-nothing scheme. Masato's bravado shattered. He finally admitted she was right. He hatched a plan to make soy sauce, wheat flour, and beer. He'd already grabbed yeast from a bread shop, locking down most of the ingredients for a tempura meal and his homemade beer. Himawari locked onto the crafty glint in his eyes and knew he was scheming again. She blurted that she wanted to try it all, but Masato barked at her to wait. He wasn't done. He snatched a dubbing card from the dungeon's depths. Curiosity burned, and dread clenched my throat as I snapped, "What are you going to duplicate?" Masato slammed the card, and an exact copy of the greenhouse burst into existence. She demanded to know what he meant to grow. He sidestepped the question and uncovered something. He dripped a single drop of growth enhancer, and the change hit instantly. The plant ballooned into a towering behemoth and swallowed Masato whole. It hit me he'd asked what it was, and Masato shrugged, deadpan, "It's for soy sauce." She gaped, stunned it could be turned into a seasoning. Masato admitted he still had a few steps left to complete it. Then, worry gnawing at him, he begged him to join him in town. They burst into a realtor's office, and a sharp young woman looked up and snapped, "What do you need?" Masato blurted he wanted a vacant lot. She slid a catalog into his hands. Curiosity coiled into a knot of worry, so I snapped, "Why do you need it?" Masato grinned and announced he'd erect a factory to house every ingredient he'd gathered. He was burning to unleash his master-level architecture skills again. After browsing, he zeroed in and chose a lot listed at a staggering 3.2 million acres. The women closed in, pressing him, need a loan or a guarantor appointment, and even offered to take one of his belongings as collateral. Short on cash, Masato steeled himself and applied for a loan. Masato slid a card forward, then snagged a chunky, irresistibly cute service brochure. The women gasped the instant they saw it. Her jaw dropped as she clutched a Wyvern circulation card, one of only 5 in existence, and she couldn't believe Masato would spend something that rare on a land purchase. He insisted it was his only option. She never imagined he'd produce something this valuable. Suddenly, Himawari and a nearby dry materialized on the phase. Masato watched him crumple into worry the instant he saw that strange pride, and Masato was left baffled. Panic hit the Wayman group as they scrambled, blank on how to securely lock the card away. Masato and Himawari sped to their next stop and reached the borrowed land, where Himawari leaned in and demanded to know how Masato was crafting the seasoning. Visada thrust his palm skyward, ignited his master-level architecture skill, and a blinding light exploded from the town center. He pictured a factory, the first floor alive with dryers and huskers stripping wheat, the second floor roaring as mills ground it into flour. The third churned out soy sauce, and the fourth bubbled with beer brewing. After graduation, his food manufacturing research carried him through the brutal job hunt. He burned with gratitude for it. The factory's roaring machines and every step of the process were seared into his mind. Before anyone could blink, a building shot up from the empty lot. Worry clawed at me as I forced a calm mask, sure she was used to Masato's wild abilities, but seeing the new forced to restructure. She shrieked, jabbed a finger at it, and demanded to know what it was. They stepped inside, and Masato's eyes drank in each floor. Every detail matched his vision. His preparations were locked in, yet bafflement churned in his gut. A worry flared and asked, "Is this what heat means?" Masato confirmed, voice steady as iron. They'd move after the harvest in 2 days, and he urged her to return to the field then to witness something truly special. Still reeling, it hit me. He just asked, "What do you mean?" 2 days later, Masato slammed a third dose of growth enhancers straight into the Hilda mushrooms. I'm a worry gaped at their colossal size, and Masato snapped, "They're visible to the necktie now." Panic clawed at me as I begged for her mother to wait a little longer. They burst into the wheat field, scouring every stalk with sharp, searching eyes. Masato ordered the dryads to sprinkle the growth enhancers, and they sprang forward, showering the ground with a glittering rain of life. The wheat shot up thick and golden, and Masato's jaw dropped. It was already harvest-ready, and when he leaned close, every stalk proved flawless. It boasted a whisper-low glycemic index, and carbs your body could absorb without insulin, so blood sugar never spiked, safe for diabetics and tasting even better. Masato staggered when those vaunted, remarkable traits crumbled into embarrassing weakness, and I know he credited the dryad's help. Masato flashed a fierce, grateful smile, thanked them for their efforts, and they sprinted toward the factory. Himawari's heart hammered. She finally got to fire up that odd machine she'd spotted on the first floor. The wheat sat bone-dry in its husk. My nerves pinged between worry and awe, and I blurted, "Do we just feed it into the machine?" Masato said it was automatic, but she stared blankly, the word meaning nothing to her. He lunged to her side to confirm she was okay, then barked that it was time to stow everything. He shoved 7 3-tons of wheat into storage, stunned because he'd only expected 5 tons per acre, and Himawari winked, crediting the surplus to the dryads. Despair clawed at Masato as he forced himself to process, hurling each ingredient onto its assigned floor. As the machines hummed to life, Himawari kept washing, confusion knotting her brow as she blurted, "So we just wait and let it finish on its own." Masato nodded, confirming it. Himawari's hunch hit dead center. She scoffed, "Is that even food?" Masato fired off each floor's purpose, and the fourth roared with massive vats fermenting the brew, while heavy filters clarified it into beer. The third breathes life into soy sauce, a maroon tank pumping as a compressor screams. The second mills flour with thunderous roller mills. The first unit thundered to life, automatically drying and ripping husks from the wheat, and a cold dread gnawed at me. This whole operation had ballooned into something wildly excessive. She waved it off as mere cooking, clueless that Masato had built groundbreaking equipment, while he watched her and wondered if she was only chasing fun. He urged her to ditch the stress over the process and picture the mouth-watering payoff waiting at the end. He swore everything would explode with flavor. Masato's eyes snapped to the soy sauce malt. It was finally ready. They exploded with giddy excitement, imagining plate after plate of mouth-watering dishes. Their excitement evaporated the instant Masato dropped the bombshell. The malt would need a full year to mature. Spotting their disappointment, he grinned and revealed a skill that would erase the whole wait time problem. He unleashed temporal tuning on the soy sauce malt bottle, and the liquid snapped into ink black. The girls' jaws dropped and they blurted, "Has it spoiled?" Masato's calm voice sliced through the panic. The black color was perfectly normal for matured soy sauce. I understood the worry, but my jaw dropped that someone unleashed such a potent spell just to age food. She scoffed temporal tuning fiddled with minutes, not ripped a whole year from the calendar. Masato scoffed, doubting the limit applied at all when his method worked flawlessly. I thundered, "I'm wary," and the dryads fell dead silent. He blinked and asked if his actions could really be that shocking. I heard him boast that with power like that, he'd never need growth enhancers again. Masato ripped through the confusion and spelled it out. Growth enhancers flood plants with unstoppable growth, while temporal tuning only fast-forwards time. Use it wrong and those plants will wither. Dread coiled in my gut as I split the mixture into 2 containers. He shouted, "One step left," and the other portion tasting too good to ignore, he set some aside. He cranked up the heat and tempered the raw soy sauce into its final form. Fear and dread surged forward, but Miss Otto slammed them to a halt. He zeroed in on another preparation and a task waiting outside. He sauntered into the empty lot, nonchalantly invoked advanced alchemy, and bottles erupted from the earth. "I'm wary watching dozens appear out of nowhere," I roared. "Where did you come from?" Masato snapped that the bottles were earmarked for the 4th floor's product. He twisted time in the fermentation tank's water to spawn young beer, chilled it down, then tuned time again. Filtered to crystal clarity and sealed into bottles, the beer was finally ready to be poured. "I'm a worry," the maze confessed. "I've never seen a drink like this," and Masato grinned, assuring her it was top-notch and to look forward to it. He roared, rallying the others to fetch the wheat flour from the 2nd floor. The moment to cook hit, apron on. Jame Worry vowed to watch every move and pry the secret from Masato's renowned cooking. Masato and Himmler worried dove headfirst into whipping up snacks together. Masato cracked eggs, poured cold water over them, added flour, and whipped it into a smooth batter. Then they cloaked fresh seafood and store-bought sweet potatoes in a flawless coating. Once the oil roared hot, he plunged the ingredients into the sizzle, then flicked ribbons of batter into the bubbling oil, forging crisp, lace-like decorative shapes. He also plunged the edamame into a roaring pot and boiled it until it steamed. The sashimi sat pre-sliced as they spread it across plates with bold, carefree hands. Masato sealed the display with one last, deliberate flourish. Spraying the spirit mediator unleashed a shimmering mist that let fairies pull up chairs and feast with humans. The meal was finished. Worry exploded inside me. A maze had never seen food like that before. They swarmed the table, eyes alight and hands darting forward, everyone poised to eat. Their first bites changed everything. Masato Fatha Sashingi blew his senses apart. It was the best he'd ever had. A wary knot tightened in my chest, but I had to admit the seasoning paired perfectly with the fish fillets. They slapped the label mold extract on it. Masato snapped, "That's soy sauce." He bit into the Kraken meat and his eyes widened. The flavor was shockingly delicious. And burst out, eyes sparkling, that both the sashimi and tempura were incredible. Himawari's jaw dropped. She hadn't expected a meal this mind-blowing. Masato tore back the curtain to unveil one final, heart-stopping day. He slammed a beer bottle and 2 clear mugs forward, boiling at a maim. A knot of worry tightened in me. I'd never seen that frothy drink, and even the dry adloped stared, baffled. Masato swelled with pride and proclaimed the drink beer, the alcohol that paired perfectly with Adam Mommy. A worry slithered forward, stole a quiet sip, and her eyes snapped wide at the delightful taste. It shattered every taste she'd ever known. Its flavor and aroma were flawless. Masato let out a low, satisfied hum at the smooth finish, then lifted his head and thanked her for collecting the hops. Worry twisted in my gut, so I scrambled to gather more, and Masato, grateful, dove straight into growing them. They bit into the edamame and were hit by a rush of rich, mouth-watering flavor. He gobbled it up like there was no tomorrow, swearing it melted in her mouth. Masato, heart exploding with joy, never imagined he'd savor food and beer like this after reincarnating into this world. Pride swelled. He'd built the factory in. He primed everything, fire in his chest, craving another round of beer in this life. Tipsy, he leaned in with a crooked grin and mumbled an apology to Heimwary for cutting the night short. Wobbling, he sank onto his cot with surprising grace and yanked a blanket over himself. Jame Worry gaped as the dryad slapped down a perfect score. Masato, once shackled to a corporate cubicle, never. I'd chased this life in my dreams, and now true happiness blazed through me. I know I tried to wake him. The next morning, fueled by monstrous vitality, Masato burst awake, clear-headed and utterly hangover-free. He reveled in how this world's magic bent to his needs, then his gaze cut to an empty space. Maori was gone. A dry head snapped that she'd slipped away the previous night. After frantically yanking Masato and screaming his name, Masato lay out cold and wouldn't stir. Himori spotted the dirty utensils and unleashed her purification skill to thank him for the meal, turning every piece spotless and gleaming. Exhilaration surged through her. She rocketed into the sky to chase down more hops. Hearing the dryad, Masato realized the truth and froze. He wondered if he'd overworked, wasted time, and even worried a dragon. But her blazing enthusiasm and the kitchen's spotless gleam stopped him cold. He realized she adored the food. Watching his worry melt into a hungry love for beer and soy sauce, Masato knew the whole world would catch her fever. He carved off a share of his harvest and sold it straight to the guild with the rest of his crops. He stepped into the guild to a frosty reception. Carol beckoned him inside, eyes blazing, and snapped that she needed to discuss something with him. Masato flinched under Carol's intimidating glare and swallowed his defiance with a silent nod. Inside, he forced a cautious voice and asked what she wanted to talk about. Carol held her tongue and unveiled a towering mountain of gold coins. They blitzed out of the Adventurers Guild, dead set on claiming the Cinderella shoe at the sale. The tally exploded to 27, 4 million, even Masato's jaw dropped. Carol gaped. She admitted she'd never laid eyes on riches like this and demanded to know what that lone item was. Masato revealed the shoe was a treasure coveted by nobles and royals. To guard his privacy, he'd funnel the sale through the Agriculture Guild and hide it behind the Adventurers Guild. He dodged nobles like ticking bombs, their webs too tangled, and the guild's ironclad secrecy put him at ease. Carol's breath hitched. She understood, and admitted she was stunned but pleased that Masato trusted the guild. He blurted out that he'd come to sell his crops. Carol's jaw dropped when she realized he'd pulled another harvest so soon. She hustled him to the warehouse and shouted for an appraiser. The wizened appraiser swept into Masato's fields, hawk-eyed and ready to inspect every stalk. As expected, his jaw hit the floor when he saw the diabetic-friendly wheat, and he hailed it as a remarkable find. He sneered at Carol, asking if she was selling ordinary seeds, skepticism and irritation coiling in his voice. Carol snapped that those special seeds weren't available on the market, and Masato prayed they wouldn't burst into an argument. The old man's jaw clenched as he realized the dryads were real and secretly backing Masato. The dryads reeled at their exposure, while Masato chuckled low and pleased. Carol locked the deal. The new crops would move only through a handful of hand-picked merchants, and for diabetic nobles, that wheat sparked a quiet revolution. The old man leaned in, whispered the story to Carol like a secret locked between them, and finished before Cole arrived. Masato barked at them to hand Cole the thing the instant he walked in. He ripped out another spread of cards like before, shoved them at Cole with a grin, used them freely, and Carol and the old man went slack-jawed, stunned as if the floor had dropped away. Their hands closed around 9 legendary, wavered free ride cards. The old man barked at Carol to lock them inside the guild's safest vault, while Masato shrugged with a lazy grin and said he could snag those cards from the dungeon anytime. Sensing the room's tension, he cracked a grin and unveiled his latest wares, handcrafted seasonings and spirits distilled from his own crops, and the mood instantly loosened. He dared them to taste the samples, eyes hunting for the reaction that would prove whether the products could sell. Masato's new creations stunned the old man, and when everyone clamored to be first to try them, their spirits soared, flooding Masato with relief. In the dining area, he whipped out the seasoning and dared them to try it on the fish fillet. Carol inhaled, eyes snapping open. The seasoning's aroma struck like a revelation, a bold braid of honeyed sweetness woven with deep savory spice. A jolt of recognition shot through the old man. He sized it up and declared it a Masato's secret soy sauce roared with ultraflavonoids, stitching DNA back together and slamming the door on cancer. Carol's eyes lit up. This could be sold as a health food. The old man just smiled. He'd seen Masato's triumph coming. Masato didn't realize the soy sauce was quietly boosting his health. He pushed them to try it. Carol and the old man bit into the fish fillet with soy sauce, chewing quietly. Carol's jaw dropped. She'd never imagined sashimi could taste this heavenly. She attacked the salt with lemon and olive oil, crowned them the winners, then roared that soy sauce would be a massive hit. The old man's eyes blazed as he nodded and proclaimed it revolutionary. Masato whooped with joy when soy sauce and sashimi actually worked wonders in this world. The old man's gaze zeroed in on the squid and he barked, "What's that?" Masato tossed off, cricken from the long sea, his casual tone splintering at the shock that a calamity monster was food. Masato's eyes flashed. This tasted amazing, and he swore he'd catch more. The old man froze, horror clawing at his throat, as Masato dismantled the beast like mere ingredients. Carol bit into the squid and raved, breathless over its explosive, unforgettable flavor. Gratitude flooded the old man as he savored a dish so rare it felt like a once-in-a-lifetime blessing. Masato beamed. His soy sauce had hit the mark. He slid the beer over next. A roar of praise ripped the secret open, revealing it as an anti-aging brew. Packed with ultrapolyphenols that slow aging, it taken daily, up to 633, slashes alcohol's harm, makes drinking from one's 20s healthier, and even extends life by 5 times. Regret slammed into the old man. He wished he'd found it sooner. Masato grinned and vowed to cast a detox spell. The instant drunkenness threatened their work. They downed the beer and the old man's eyes widened. Its silk smoothness stunned him, nothing like any brew he'd ever tasted. Carol soaked it up too, savoring every ice-cold drink. Masato's memory slammed full force into the world lacked refrigerators. Carol felt like she'd just feasted at a 5-star restaurant, and she thanked him. As the appraiser, the old man's chest swelled with pride. Masato vowed to crank production into overdrive. Carol pressed him about where the soy sauce came from. He shot back. They revealed it sprang from wheat, soybeans, kaji, and fermented microorganisms. The old man leaned in, breathless, and blurted, "Did Masato just discover an entirely new species of these microorganisms?" Carol gaped at his biology brilliance, convinced he was unmatched across the board. Masato sneered that they'd overestimated him. Carol froze, unsure if she should spill such valuable details. Masato shrugged and grinned, saying he didn't mind. He wasn't trying to hog them. He leaned forward, asking when Carl would return. Carol shot back, in 3 weeks. Masato vowed the next batch would be piled with wheat, slammed with extra soy sauce, and fueled by a generous pour of beer, and insisted someone sprint out and snatch up more wheat and soybean seeds. Extra funds landed, and he slammed them down to wipe the land loan off the books months early. At the realtor's office, she froze, jaw dropping when he strode in. He announced he'd come to pay, and her eyes welled with tears. Elation hit them hard as they begged him to take back the wavering card clinging to its dresser. Masato wondered if it was really that tough. The factory land belonged to him now. A dryad leaned in and asked what his next move would be. Masato swore he'd plant the new seeds and called on them to help. The dryad agreed. His hands moved like a veteran. He ripped the earth open and sent the seeds arcing in a perfect, even rain across the field. The dryads gaped at Masato's display as he whipped out a familiar can. The dryads felt the moment strike and surged forward, volunteering to apply the growth enhancers. A torrent of enhancer solution poured from their clouds, drenching everything below. Masato waved it off, declared that was enough, pointed to the late hour and urged everyone to head home for dinner. The dryads whooped at dusk, but Masato kept walking back toward his own home. He darted through the market and grabbed eggs, garlic, tomatoes, and wheat flour. Tonight's dinner was going to be a breeze. At home, a dry, dismissive flick snapped him into silence. He burst into the living room and found Himori under arrest on the couch. Watching the dragon sleep so peacefully, Masato's guilt exploded. He'd been dumping task after task on her. He'd barreled into M, the sting of his grueling corporate job flashing through his mind. He refused to forge a harsh environment like those workplaces that poison you from the inside out. He hissed at the dry head to slip into the kitchen and set everything up on tiptoe so she wouldn't wake. Masato declared he'd make a no-water tomato pasta. The dryad, eyes bright with curiosity, asked what it was, and he grinned, "Watch me," then told her to watch him work. He slammed flour and salt together, poured in water, eggs, and olive oil, then kneaded the mixture until it surrendered into a smooth, springy dough. He ripped a 2-hour task down to seconds with temporal tuning, sliced the dough, and the noodles were ready instantly. Channeling advanced alchemy, he forged a gleaming pot from raw elements. I shoved minced garlic, whole tomatoes, and noodles straight into it. Not a single drop of water. The ingredients bled hot juices that steamed the noodles into tender perfection. Tomato flavor surged through them. I snapped awake, worry clawing at my gut, see Masato cooking. She snapped awake, greeted him with a radiant smile, and left Masato stunned. He'd been sure she'd be exhausted. She swore the irresistible aroma yanked her straight out of sleep. Himori shot upright from a brief nap and boasted she was fine. Dragons only rest once a year. Relief flooded Masato as he admitted he'd worry himself sick. Dinner was almost finished, and he barked at the girls to sit. Joy surged through her as the steaming pasta was set before her. Masato piled molten cheese onto the dish, showered it with fragrant herbs, and blasted it with spirit mediator spray. Everyone dove in for a bite. Himewari raved that the tomato-infused noodles were delicious. Masato explained how his secret method had sculpted the noodles into flawless, bite-perfect strands. He spotted an entire world with no pressure cookers, and his mind ignited with a plan to sell them. They savored the meal, and Masato flashed a grin, suggesting we boil edamame and crack open some beers, while a knot of worry tightened in my chest. They swarmed him with thanks, raving about his farm's mouthwatering food. Masato's memory snapped into place. He asked her to check the farm with him and declared the mushrooms were almost ready to harvest. Himewari raced to Masato's farm to see the mushrooms. He'd vanished, then his voice ripped through the silence, and she knew with iron certainty he was genuine. I was pinned inside the second greenhouse as the koji exploded into suffocating overgrowth. She ripped him free and snapped, "What are you doing?" Masato flashed a grateful smile, thanked her for the rescue, and said he was making more soy sauce. He offered a quick apology for the trouble, then held up the mushrooms like a prized trophy. I could see delight blazing across his face. Masato blurted, "Can we move them?" She waved him off. "Go ahead, they're fine. They only need special conditions while they're growing." Relief slammed into Masato when the mushrooms finally matured. They'd driven him to the edge of worry, and now his eyes glittered as he watched. On Owl Hill, the dark mushroom hides a potent ingredient that treats specific illnesses. I linger where a gently picked one rests, a faint sadness ghosting its face. She thanked Masato, declaring one mushroom could yield a potent medicine, and Masato's jaw tightened. He'd make every remaining mushroom count. He asked how she'd make the medicine. She admitted her wariness and promised to measure the prepared ingredients with exacting precision and handle the rest herself. Masato pictured a witch hunched over a bubbling cauldron, but instead worry slid on gloves. Snatch the pestle and mortar, pulverize the material, then storm the lab bench and fire up the equipment. She adopted the air of a scientist, scrutinizing the test tube with razor focus as she pressed on. Masato's jaw dropped. It wasn't anything like he'd imagined. Seeing her skillful work, memories slammed into him. Time Warrior's talent devoured her focus so effortlessly she'd forget she was a dragon. Regret slammed into him. If he'd taken his university experiments seriously, he might have landed a good job. A putrid stench yanked Masato out of his thoughts and screamed danger into his bones. He hurled a wide-range detox, a cleansing shockwave that purged the whole area in an instant. This gas was a human killer, twice as potent as any ordinary hazardous gas. Masato trembled and pleaded, worry sharp in his voice, "Be careful." She apologized, her gaze snapping to the dragon's rumium clinging to it. Masato deemed the plan too risky, so he unleashed his master-level architectural genius and built a fume hood to purge toxic gases and airborne organisms. He barked for her to work inside it. I watched him apologize again, swallow his pride, and do exactly as he was told. Masato exhaled, trusting his sky-high stats as a shield, but he kept his guard. Safety came first. After 3 grueling hours, he and Mary finally fashioned the medicine her mother needed. She begged Masato for a drink from the factory. He poured a beer into a mug, and my stomach dropped as she slammed it back in one gulp. Satisfaction curled on the dragon's snout. Masato just shrugged. He figured beer was like an energy drink to a dragon. Masato snapped, "Are you heading to see your mother right now?" She summoned Masato to accompany her into another world to meet her mother, who lives there as a mushroom grower. Masato agreed eagerly, excitement roaring in his chest at the thought of exploring more places. He begged them to take him. Masato and he, panic flaring, bolted away. She raced up the mountain and burst into the cottage where her sick mother lay. Frost gnawed at the air, but Masato's surging vitality wrapped him in a warm armor, keeping him perfectly comfortable. Traveling solo, he'd have been swallowed by the wilderness without his razor-sharp skills steering him. He kept walking until he stopped dead. Trees around him glowed, and one flared with brilliant rainbow light. He sized it up and realized, it's a gaming mummy fur, a globe that flared the moment someone with over 1,000 numbers came near, forged from ancient dragon genes and spawning new growth faster than ordinary trees. Masato's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe an ancient dragon had made it. Himewari slammed the truth down. Her mother had forged it and... The attempt collapsed. None of her mother's many experiments could replace the rare Owl Hill Doki mushroom. It revealed more failures, a coral-like bush and strange, buzzing bees. Masato realized Maori's mother wouldn't lie down for death. She kept furiously running experiment after experiment. They screamed worry at me, and then they reached a cave. She said her mother was inside. As they stepped into the room, Masato's breath caught at the sight of a woman slumped on a cot. Worry's mother stirred, snapping her eyes open the instant his voice sliced through the silence. She eased herself upright, fingers groping blindly for something to touch. Racked with worry, she gripped her mother's hand and blurted, "I've come back after a long time away." Her mother flashed a warm smile, but Masato's gaze snagged on her glazed, unfocused eyes. White mage's disease had stolen her sight. Confusion slammed into Himawari. Last time she saw her mother, she was a dragon. Her mother confessed she'd morphed into a human just to shrink that device, and Masato seized a prayasol the instant he uncovered it. An ancient dragon artifact that ripped corruption from magic, treated the white mage's disease, and bought a dragon 10 extra years of life. Masato waged war for 10 years, a single blink in a dragon's lifetime. Himawari's mother let out a ragged breath and declared, "This is the best I can manage." My mother's hand squeezed mine, wary and tight, and when someone asked what was happening, she slammed the truth on the table. She'd engineered a miracle medicine to cure her. Her mother stopped dead, then let out a sharp, stunned cry. She tilted her head, voice soft as honey, and asked how Himawari pulled it off. Then, voice trembling, admitted, "I'm worried, I followed the theory." The room roared as they unmasked Masato, the man who cultivated the Al-Hill dark mushroom. Masato shot a quick, embarrassed apology for not introducing himself earlier, then owned up, "I'm a farmer." "I'm worried," Mother gaped, disbelief blazing in her eyes that a human farmer could grow a mushroom this rare. Himawari blinked in surprise, steeled herself, and insisted her mother drink the medicine first. Sensing the gravity in her voice, her mother snatched the bottle, popped the cap, and drank. The instant the liquid slid down her throat, relief crashed through her, color flaring back into her eyes as she gasped, "I can see again." She snatched the syringe, drew her own blood, then shook the syringe until the results flashed. The negative test screamed freedom. She was completely cured. Masato's jaw dropped as the medicine slammed into him, its effects detonating in an instant. He pulled her mother into a fierce, desperate hug, sobbing with joy, while her mother apologized for worrying her and gently wiped away her tears. Masato let out a long, exhausted sigh of relief as Himawari's mother met his gaze, thanked him with raw sincerity, apologized for doubting him, and gasped that he'd saved her life. Masato just smiled and said, "You're very welcome." Relief slammed into her as her vision snapped back. She gaped. He'd tamed dryads, a nearly impossible feat. She gaped, unable to fathom his impossible abilities. It staggered her that anyone could do that. Masato's magic roared beyond measure, and she couldn't figure out how he conjured the mushroom. She stared, stunned that her daughter could meet someone like that. I froze, wary and fumbling for an explanation. Masato swore he'd been swallowed by the forest after a string of wild events and stumbled into her by pure chance. She and worry guided him back to town, and their friendship ignited without a single quarrel. Her mother knew instantly. This chance meeting had ripped her back from the brink and saved her life. She threw Sato's farmer claim back at him and asked again. He met her stare and confirmed it. She flashed a sly grin, declared she'd found the perfect gift, and beckoned him outside. Bursting outside, Masato and Himawari froze, eyes wide, mouths agape, as a massive chunk of earth hung in the sky. Masato blurted, "What is that?" Himawari's mother announced it, the floating continent, his reward for growing the Al-Hill dark mushroom, and implored him to accept it. Himawari snapped at her mother, "Did you ever own anything like this?" Masato demanded how he was meant to use it. Himawari's mother ordered him onto the floating land, and Masato launched himself onto it. She barked for him to channel his magic into it. He hurled his power, ripped open his status window, and froze at the message, 10,500 members. He poured 5,000 into the land on the spot. A radiant magic circle blazed at his feet. The floating continent trembled. Then with a thunderous roar it exploded outward, swelling to an enormous size. Masato couldn't make out its edges. Speechless and stunned, he stood gaping as a voice called, "You okay?" He nodded, confessed he'd pushed his magic too far, terrified he'd accidentally buried a mountain in a cave. Himawari's mother squeezed his shoulder and promised it was fine, he could check again later. Masato launched himself off the continent, the land beneath shrinking into a distant speck in his vision, just like last time. She revealed the floating continent devoured new magic and swelled inward, 1 acre for every magic point, while its exterior never budged, no matter how cavernous it grew inside. She declared the land a farming paradise, the perfect proving ground to hone Sato's skills. He hesitated, then dared to ask, could he truly accept a gift this powerful? Worry's mother said she'd crafted it to grow the rare mushroom in owl guards. Healed now, she no longer needed it and handed it to Masato, and Masato thanked her. She had one more gift. She thrust a seat carved from the world tree into his hands, made for someone who'd stained dryads. The dryads exploded with joy, begging Masad to tend to it, and he stood gaping, stunned to be handed something so extraordinary. Himawari's mother laid bare the world tree's ancient, living bond with the Dryads. The fruit turbocharged their growth and forged raw strength. Masada couldn't fathom what she meant by greater heights. But they decided to plant the seed, plunging it into soil drenched with a potent growth enhancer. In an instant, a tiny sprout burst from the soil, jolting him and Worry's mother into stunned silence. She swore the tree should have needed 1,000 years to fruit, and I panicked as Masato crowed he'd used a growth enhancer for just 3 months. Masato, thrown off by her fierce pride, barked that they had a long way to go and swore he'd tend the world tree for the Dryers. He spilled his thanks to him, or to his mother, for her generosity. She brushed it off, insisting no gift could ever repay him for saving her life. I'm a jittering wreck of worry as the Dryads burst into wild excitement over the world tree, and Masato stands frozen, mouth agape, unable to accept the unbelievable gift he's just received. The land screamed opportunity, tailor-made for his dream of growing a dazzling variety of crops. He burned with anticipation for the future, while anxiety gnawed at his gut. Next time we hit the seed aisle, I'll have to lay this whole thing out to Carol. Days later, worry gnawing at him, he races to Mother Tot Masato to clear his head and steal his focus. They tell him to picture his desired island. Masato clamps his eyes shut and channels every ounce of focus into the vision. Something crawled into existence right in front of him. I'm wary the Dryads watched, eyes locked and breath held, and in moments a small island burst up from the sea. A frantic mother proved it. Masato can conjure islands that stay invisible to anyone beyond the continent. Anything made on the island snaps back to normal the moment it leaves its shores, freed from the island's warped space, and Himawari's mother revealed the land itself bends to Masato's imagination, morphing into whatever he pictures. In a heartbeat, a geyser of inky black liquid blasted from the island, spraying skyward like a cursed fountain. Fear froze him, sure something had failed, but Masato turned to her with a sly grin and declared it was deliberate. He'd pictured an oil field all along. I'm a jittering ball of worry, utterly clueless about oil fields. Masato thrust his hand out, channeling advanced alchemy to turn. They funneled some of the inky black liquid into clear plastic bottles. Himawari's jaw dropped as the dark liquid seemed to morph into clear containers. Masato snapped, "They're plastic bottles." A worried mother gaped when Masato's very first creation on the island turned out to be a plain container, a jaw-dropping showcase of his knack for the unexpected. Mori shot back with proud defiance, insisting she wasn't shocked at all, and Masato only smirked as he teased her about the surprised look she'd flashed earlier. He whooped, grinning from ear to ear. He'd nailed the bottles, and Himawari already knew exactly what they were for. Masato blasted up to the factory's 3rd and 4th floors, bent time around the beer and soy sauce, and roared that everything was ready. I already knew they'd be the ones pouring the products into the bottles, and Masato confirmed they had to package them for sale. When the oil field ran dry, Masato grabbed the island's last soil and fused it into countless glass bottles, then asked Hanwari to picture him doing it in an empty city lot. I could tell he understood that digging those holes in a jam-packed crowd would have unleashed chaos. Watching the production, a wave of drowsiness slammed into her, her eyelids turning leaden. She tracked each bottle as it filled, one by one. Masato cranked out 10,555 bottles of soy sauce, and, shockingly, both 12870 bottles of beer. The numbers hit like a punch, 10,000 soy sauce servings and 100,000 beers to sell, and Carol knew she couldn't haul this alone. He turned a wiper and circulation card into a makeshift rack, stuffing extra bottles into it and reclaiming space. Masato unleashed every truth to Carol, then thanked her with fierce gratitude for the valuable card. He barked that she mustn't call the appraiser and boldly dared her to try the products herself, calling one a seasoning and the other a drink. Carol gawked at the strange container and blurted, "What's it made of? I've never seen anything like it." Masato explained it was a plastic bottle, and shoved an empty one into her hands to inspect. Carol found it soft and reveled in Bive's crisp crinkling. Masato dared it wouldn't shatter if dropped. Carol's eyes flashed. She instantly saw how useful it was. Restricted to selling only through Cole, she guarded it until his return. Masato thanked her for her care, and Carol snapped, "So, what's your next move?" Masato shot out his request, 7 hectares of wheat and 3 hectares of soybeans, shock plastered across his face. Carol barked at him to slow down. His 1-hectare plot couldn't handle it. Masato caught the shock in her eyes. She still had no idea what had just happened. He blurted he'd been given a special plot of land by someone he knew, and Carol's gut clenched. She feared he'd been duped. Masato snapped, "That's not true." He unleashed a flood of details about the floating island. He crunched the numbers. 50 hectares were now his. Carol nodded, unfazed by Masato's impossible feats, and Masato leaned in and asked sharply if she was truly okay with that. Carol scanned the fields, figured he had even more land, and asked if he needed anything else. Masato replied with a list, 8 hectares each of carrots, potatoes, and onions. Burdock and taro, Carol's pen flew as she jotted the order into her log. Masato tore up the land lease and snatched his money back. And they could slash their spending on new seeds. Misato and Himawari touched down on the floating island, so vast it shrank them into ant-sized specks when seen from above. I crept back warily with the wood ash Masato had requested, while the dryads vowed to pray fiercely for rain to bless the land. As Himawari, Masato thundered his thanks for their help. She whirled through the air, flinging wood ash from her dimensional storage. At the same time, Masato launched seeds with his signature technique, and the dryads poured every prayer into summoning rain to nourish the fields. The fields lay ready, but a fresh crisis slammed into Masato. The land had ballooned into a vast expanse, and his stash of growth accelerators ran out long before he could cover it. To get more, he'd have to plunge deeper into the dungeon's black heart. Masato plunged into the dungeon, stacking spell after spell onto his sword, until it hummed with lethal magic. He shot a grateful nod to the dryads. The sword suddenly screamed on his intelligence stat, but the I'm wary warning never showed. She crouched in the dungeon's elevator, swallowed by shadow. They seethed about being stuck at depth 90, and Masato, confused, had planned to start much deeper at level 160. She choked out she couldn't handle that level in human form and frantically begged Masato to buff her or let her wait outside, anxiety crackling in her voice. Masato hunted the perfect buff, slammed timed into the enhancement, and her fear evaporated instantly. She fired the question about the skill and felt power surge through her. Masato declared it would supercharge every ability she had. It endures when he's gone, turns into a lifeline in crises, and that's where I forge my confidence. At level 160, I heard him brag they'd breezed right through it. But the boss revealed itself as a colossal octopus, tentacles thrashing. He scoffed, unfazed by the tentacle's menacing aura. He doubted she could stand against it in her current state. Masato clenched his sword and surged forward, cleaving the octopus cleanly in two as it vanished the instant it died. He thanked him for the boost, crowing that at last she could see his moves crystal clear, and Masato blinked, stunned to find she was more fired up to watch him than to fight. I know I already told you she'd been burning to see how Masato could take down enemies with a single, devastating strike. It hit him. The monsters out there dwarfed the ones he'd gunned down before. Their eyes locked on an object the octopus had dropped, and their breath hitched, a laptop-stamped supermagic computer. Masato froze at the sight of a MacBook. Stunned, it slipped from his hands and crashed down as memories of his life as a corporate slave slammed back in. He couldn't believe something from that world had turned up in his new life, and he muttered, shaking at the reminder of his second chance. Panic surged had the laptop's sight swamped him. Masato couldn't fully explain his reaction. He grudgingly admitted it had once been his fiercest enemy, yet he glimpsed its usefulness and pinned high hopes on it. Deep in the dungeon's belly, a winged figure burst from the shadows, eyes flickering like embers and a halo burning with an eerie glow. Masato came face to face with a humanoid nightmare named Lucifer of the 9 divine trials. Knowing no human should be on this floor, he pounced without hesitation, and just as he'd predicted, a single devastating strike sent the monster crashing down, utterly unable to resist. Himawari gaped. The fight was over in a heartbeat, and the creature spat out an item, the Imperial Elixir. A potion can grant a nation's leader immortality if they drink it, govern with compassion and they live forever, rule harshly and the instant they outlive their natural lifespan they perish. The elixir works under any government. Masato's chest dropped as he grasped it wasn't meant for him. In a land with no sole leader, no one could use it. He clawed at the question why it had landed in his hands, and Hima stood mute, words gone. Masato's grin turned razor-sharp. He'd hawk the elixir at the guild later. Meanwhile, the dryads traded sly, knowing looks, as if they already knew something about it. The group plunged deeper into the dungeon, slipping past a chamber so silent it seemed to swallow every breath. Masato's gaze snapped to the nearby monsters, ghostly, see-through bears, assassin bears. They dove into the shadows as Masato's eyes locked on their ghostly silhouettes, and Himawari snapped that these things had no physical bodies. It tore into sight only when an attack struck, obliterating any hope of a one-shot kill. Gratitude washed over Masato when she appeared, and her calm explanation untied the tight knot of tension in his chest. Trusting his sword, he charged forward. Heart racing and utterly puzzled, I shouted, "Where are you headed?" Masato tore through the assassin bears, felling each one with a single, lightning-fast strike. The monster crumpled and Himawari lunged forward, breathless and demanding how he'd taken them down. Masato smirked and reminded her he'd buffed his sword earlier. Himawari knew about the buff, but was dead sure it only affected monsters immune to physical strikes, not flesh and blood threats like the assassin bears. Masato announced his genius staff had supercharged the buff to hit every one of his targets, and the nervous onlooker stared, stunned by how wild that sounded. They tossed out the idea that Masato might thrive as a blacksmith. Masato scoffed. Almost no one dared this deep into the dungeon, so who would buy his swords? Suddenly, an item tore free from the assassin bears and clattered to the ground. Schrodinger's card case bided its time, sealed tight until opened. When cracked, it spat out exactly 100 identical cards, never a mix of types, and once revealed, the set was locked forever. Masato's pulse hammered. Inside the pack lurked a 5% chance for a valuable Weaver and Circulation card, and a razor-thin 1% chance for a dubbing card that could boost his items, eliminating the need for growth grinding. This would let him replicate his existing accelerators in an instant, without lifting a finger. I fear greed could become an asset, but I doubt it's that simple. She pointed out the card type was totally random. With 5 cases, Masato's shot at the card he wanted was razor-thin, and Masato nodded in agreement. Call out the skill that could flip the odds his way. It runs on RNG. It was the holy grail gacha players craved, the surefire way to lock down their favorite in-game characters. I warned Marvel, dread coiling in my gut, that those odd skills might actually prove useful. Masato activated it. In an instant, a cascade of cards erupted into being right before him. It set him free to snatch his favorite from the entire lineup. He zeroed in on a single card, snatched it, and the skill struck perfectly. He flashed a dubbing card. Every other card in the case had to be a dubbing card too. Himawari snorted, calling it dumb luck even for Masato, then zeroed in on the Wyvern Circulation card. The next case burst open, spilling 100 Wyvern Circulation cards across the table, and Himawari swallowed her pride to tell Masato she regretted doubting his abilities. Masato admitted the odds were microscopic, just 0.05%, and I watched him start to believe Masato's bizarre skill actually worked. Masato transformed the remaining cases into dubbing cards, and panic flared in me. Those cards could supercharge any potent growth accelerators. She realized they'd yet to uncover a single growth accelerator. Masato beamed with stubborn confidence, sure they'd pop up on the next levels. The group burst onto the 161st level. Masato stared as the monster revealed itself, the incarnation of the servant, a colossal oriental dragon ripping across the floor, and he staggered back, stunned. He'd always known dragons here were benevolent, so he recoiled at the thought of attacking any dragon-like creature. When he realized this one was different, relief flooded him. Masato didn't hesitate. He cleaved the dragon, certain the victory was already his. The creature crumpled, and an item skittered free in an instant. Masato's chest surged with triumph as he seized the very item he'd spotted. This Reincarnated growth accelerator blasted a decade of growth onto a single acre. Dilution let you stretch or shrink the growth time, and it had no cooldown. Masato drank in its crushing power, but winced at the cramped reach. He recognized Masato's field was vast. Still, the complete lack of a cooldown shot its value through the roof. I'm worried. I suggested it could even benefit the world tree. Without warning, a massive claw ripped down from the sky and loomed over them. They dove aside in a heartbeat. Masato spun and came face to face with another oriental dragon. He wondered if it was the same type, but a surge through his bones told him this one was stronger. He vaulted off the ceiling for leverage, hurled himself into a death plunge, and cleaved the dragon into fragments. As predicted, it was a one-strike kill. Something else slammed into Masato, and its shape gave it away, another growth accelerator. It ignited a year-long explosion of growth across 400 hectares, the Adolution's growth fully adjustable. The undiluted form demanded a savage 7-day cooldown. Masato whooped, his coverage now 8 times the floating islands. At this rate, a 1-year time jump would let him reap most of his crops in an instant. With both growth accelerators in hand, Masato turbocharged his fields and the world tree into life at lightning speed. He bolted for the surface. I, panic rising, asked if he was done grinding. Masato smirked and declared he'd already claimed the dubbing cards. Back on the surface, the stranger shot Masato a wary glance, muttered a terse farewell, and went home. Curious, Masato flipped his staff over and inspected it. True to form, we were off the charts, soaring even higher while he flew home. He pleaded with the dryad to fine-tune his intelligence stat. On the floating island, one by one, the dryad stepped forward, pouring their voices into the sprouting world tree. Masada's stomach dropped. He had no clue how massive the world tree might grow, and he'd only set aside a 5-meter radius, now panicking that it wouldn't be nearly enough. Masato slammed a single thought into his mother's mind. With the dryad's aid, she announced the world tree's diameter, roots included, would span 30 to 36 meters, and when Masato worried, she just stared, baffled. It wasn't anywhere near fully grown. Masato proclaimed he possessed a potent growth accelerator and would force the tree into full maturity so its fruits ripened that very day. His mother stood slack-jawed as Masato ripped up the farming rulebook and unleashed wildly unorthodox techniques. Masato barked the command, and the dryads ripped the sky open, blanketing the island with growth accelerator rain. Only a ring of clouds held back to shield the world tree, leaving its sapling untouched. Rain hammered down as Masato watched the plants rocket skyward. The onions swelled and were instantly ready to be pulled. He commanded the dryads to choke off the rain over that stretch and redirect the downpour into other areas. Masato joined forces with the dryads, pruning and coaxing every plant back to life. When they finished, Masato stepped forward, eyes blazing with gratitude, and thanked everyone for their tireless efforts. They reaped a staggering harvest in a single day, and Masato methodically scanned the totals. Piled sky-high, 52 tons of wheat, 8 tons of soybeans, 322 tons of carrots, 336 tons of potatoes, 456 tons of onions, 176 tons of burdock, and 704 tons of taro. Astonished by the abundance, he cried out for the dryads to pause before they drenched the wilted crops with restorative rain, insisting they spare the world tree. The dryads calmed him, promising there was nothing to fear. They revealed the world tree was one of a kind, and with thrive it stood unbowed even under the pouring rain. To demonstrate, they unleashed a torrential downpour on it. Alarmed, Masato shouted for them to stop and snatched his magic computer from storage. He'd almost left it behind. He plunged into its built-in Wikipedia, scouring entries until a bolt of recognition slammed through him. He slammed in the terms world tree and restorative ring cloud. The results show that even a whisper of restorative rain would siphon nutrients from nearby lands, catapulting the world tree into fierce new growth and fortifying it. It hit like brutal muscle training. Masato's breath caught as the sapling pulsed with fresh life, looking healthier than usual. Moments later, the dryads returned, voices ringing as they declared the task complete. Masato's pulse quickened as she debated unleashing a growth accelerator on the tree. He granted one dryad a hard-earned rest when fatigue crashed over them, honoring every ounce of their labor. The dryads snapped they were fine and pressed Masato to trust them with the task. Masato burst into the circle, and together they unleashed a jubilant downpour over the world tree sapling. In an instant, the sapling snapped its shoots skyward, searching the sky. Its branches and leaves burst outward, nearly swallowing the entire island. Masato feared its shadow would swallow the smaller plants, sunlight. He watched the undersides of the world tree's leaves flare red, and instantly knew that this glow was exactly what the green leaves needed to soak up. The tree thrummed in perfect harmony with the surrounding plants. Suddenly, a blinding spear of light ripped from the world tree, and the dryads snapped to attention, eyes locking on the flare. They erupted into a wild victory dance, claiming their hard-won success. The world tree sagged, heavy with ripe fruit, and Masato's mind raced as he imagined how those fruits could reshape his life in this new world. The dryads twirled through the world tree's branches, plucking sun-warm fruit with peals of laughter and nudging one another, one each, no more. Masato's memory sparked with whispers that the world tree's fruit could bridge to the spirit realm, but doubt gnawed at him. A stranger closed the distance and thrust a fruit into his hand. He roared that it was all thanks to his help, nurturing the world tree. Masato grasped the fruit with a grateful smile, then everyone sank down together and dug in. Masato declared the fruit velvety and mouth-wateringly delicious, just like an avocado, and then dipped a piece into soy sauce. The flawless taste hit him like a revelation and sent tears streaming down his face. He whipped around and saw a pulsing globe behind him. The dryads blazed radiant, as if mid-transformation. 12 have been transformed into cells. He unleashed game-changing powers to grow jaw-dropping, top-tier crops. They became architects of bold new plant varieties. 14 others transformed another way, honing uncanny talents for raising and breeding animals. In a single Masato reality twisted so fast he couldn't grasp it all, and then Masato's mind slammed into the truth. The fruit can catapult one to their pinnacle. The system hit him with a startling message. A proclamation boomed. By his nation's decree, he was now their country's leader. The prompt ordered him to rip open his item box, snatch the imperial elixir inside, and use it. The realization struck Masato like a thunderclap. He was now the head of a nation. The bargain slammed into him like a blade. The elixir granted immortality only while he ruled with justice. Rule cruelly and it would shatter, so he tucked it away for now. Masato's curiosity ignited as he watched the self's new powers unfurl. They met his gaze, and then, impossibly, began to yawn. One after another they fidgeted, leapt up, and perched on the tree branches. A sudden chorus of "good night" stunned Masato, and he blinked once before surrendering to sleep. The system flagged their shift into NAT mode. Masato cracked a grin. He let them sink into rest, saluted their relentless grind, and desperately wanted them to recharge. After a long, tense pause, he slid down the trunk, mind racing through his next move. A part of him snapped, demanding he stop. Surprised she was awake, Masato implored her to rest more if she needed. The silt snapped, "I'm just curious." Masato beckoned her closer, shot his right hand forward, and roared that this was his turn to go all out. A luminous sigil burst to life on his palm and raced outward, swallowing the whole floating island. The island convulsed and swelled, surging outward. A nearby dry-eyed onlooker, normally rock-steady, stood stunned by the transformation, and Masato announced he wished to create something. When the dryad snapped, "What?" He shot back vinegar and miso. He hunted down koji mold and lactic acid bacteria for his plant. Yeast drifts in on the air and clings to the wheat as fermentation kicks into gear. He knew betting everything on acetic acid bacteria would doom him to chaotic, unpredictable results. Listen up, this is the pulse-pounding tale of beneficial bacteria and honeydew intestines you harvest by dissecting them. He fixated on genetically modified honey that flowed ultra-sweet, baiting swarms of bacteria. He primed a precise chemical to rocket the process forward, then vowed to forge the necessary containers on a distant floating island, while the silt watched Masato fashion more bottles, bewilderment rippling through it. Masato snapped that he wasn't just brewing miso and vinegar. Another electrifying idea sparked in him. Later, he and his other self climbed onto the factory rooftop, carving a route with his special great architecture skill. Masato slammed new floors onto the structure, then bizarre machines blinked into existence, alien contraptions he couldn't even name. Her heart leapt. She was convinced he had conjured miso and vinegar with them. Masato warned her to pick her steps. This sprawling void would devour hours as she tried to find her way. The fifth floor was a full-on lair dedicated to misproduction. Masato wondered if the people of this world would gobble miso by the cartload. For now, he decided to whip up a tiny batch just for himself. He slammed 2 kilograms of salt into the mix, dumped 5 kilograms of soybeans, heaved in 5 kilograms of wheat, and topped it with the exact amount of cagium old. He plunged the soybeans into water to soak, then boiled them relentlessly for an hour and a half. Then he slammed the other components into the mix and stirred them into one roaring whole. That night at Masato's home, Himawari shot awake from a nap and gaped as Masato stirred a simmering pot at the stove. He urged her to brace herself for the feast. Finally, he forged the very thing his soul had been starving for. I bristled, sure he'd hatched another wildly inventive scheme. I asked myself what he was preparing for this special occasion. Masato grinned and declared he'd turn every vegetable they'd harvested into one massive, mouth-watering dish. He plunged thin slices of burdock root into water spiked with vinegar, letting them soak. Masato coaxed the taro root into a low simmer, taming its bold flavor into a gentle warmth. He plunged the tougher vegetables into the pot, submerging them in water. As the onions surrender, he folds in the miso and coaxes the pot to a gentle shimmer, yanking it back before it ever boils. Masato announced he was finished, potato mochi and steaming miso soup served with a cold glass of beer. Himawari beamed and said the meal looked delicious. They gathered around the steaming spread, voices ringing with gratitude as Masato nudged the girls to pick up chopsticks. Tradition demanded them for dishes like these. The girls dove into the potato mochi, faces exploding into delighted grins with the very first bite. Masato raved that the sweet and spicy punch and chewy texture were perfect. The silt echoed the verdict, then they slurped the miso soup. The moment Masato sipped, lightning detonated through him as a raw, roaring sensation sketched Japan's map across his mind, with Mount Fuji towering dead center. The taste of home crashed back over him, every spice searing bright on his tongue. Himawari's breath hitched as humble seasonings ignited the ingredients' flavors into dazzling life. The silt swelled with pride as the vegetables they'd coaxed from its depths exploded with unforgettable flavor. Masato's heart surged with joy as everyone rallied and saved the meal. For a Japanese person, that miso soup hit like homesickness and ignited a fierce craving for rice. A bolt of inspiration struck him. Could Seltz's plant-boosting powers let him cultivate rice so exceptional it would blow minds? He pictured finally achieving his dream of producing the finest rice, the vision lighting him up. Mid-meal, I watched his face go still as a sudden realization hit. She spun around and demanded, "Who is this self?" Masato sneered and taunted her for noticing it so late. The next day, Masato and his Silk leapt onto Himawari, now a towering dragon, and Himawari roared her praise for his explosive power-up. They discovered it catapulted them straight to their destination with blistering speed. For a split second, Masato hurtled downward as if he were aboard a jet in a nosedive. The group charged into the wild, hunting down a one-of-a-kind plant. They hunted down the original rice strain, cultivated it with fierce care, and later savored bowls of impossibly delicious rice. Their search plunged them straight into the choking, emerald depths of a tropical jungle. Masato burst in and slammed a photo of the race down in front of the girls. Traps snapped at them, hearts pounding, and between ambushes they soaked up rare, peaceful lulls as they tracked. Hours later, he caught sight of something and lunged to investigate. She beckoned Masato over, and the instant he saw it, recognition crashed into him like a thunderbolt. He fired up his appraisal skill and locked onto Arisa, a grass that yields edible, starchy grains, exactly what they needed. Masato's voice slammed down like a gavel. This was the scientific name for rice, every single detail matched. A worried voice cut through the hush. "Is this the right plant?" Masato's grin blazed, perfect, and he rallied everyone to swarm the patch and scoop up every last one. He declared, voice crackling with excitement, with their new plant breeding powers, they could sculpt it into a mouthwatering crop. The jurors bolted, lunging to snatch it before Masato could finish. Less than a minute later, he barreled back with a massive bundle and asked, "Is this enough?" Masato grinned and told her it was more than enough. Later, on the floating island, he plunged rice seedlings into a tiny paddy and drenched the water with a growth booster and crackling magic. Himawari stood baffled as he planted rice the traditional way, unsure he could still call on their rain or other aid, and Masato assured him this was only the first step. He snatched a kernel, let its flavor explode on his tongue, first the taste, then he'd perfect it through selective breeding. He unleashed his advanced architectural mastery and built a 7-story extension onto the factory. Masato turned the new floor into a buzzing thrashing and polishing station, ran the first harvest through it, then cooked the rice and ladled it into 3 steaming bowls for them to share. He scoffed at the tiny grains. Someone muttered, "I'm worried." Then, awestruck that Masato had produced rice, predicted it'd taste great. Masato, clutching hope, bit in. The girls tasted it too, and the air at the table sank into gloom as Masato conceded it was only passable. Himawari echoed that it was hardly palatable, and one of them sniffled that it was dry and crumbly, like chewing a weed. Masato clenched his jaw, eyes burning, and declared he finally knew exactly what to do next. Himawari scoffed the rice could never be tasty. Masato swore he'd make it irresistible. He pressed the silks into service, ordering them to reshape the rice so it cooked up into plump, round, pillow-soft grains. Silence hit the room like a punch. She clawed at her temples, clutching her head. Baffled, she snapped at Masato to explain himself, what he meant and what she should do next, then froze as the full force of her confusion hit. Masato snapped. To nail that flaky texture, they had to slash the amylose and crank up the millipectin. The cell reeled, overwhelmed, and choked out that she'd rather dive into the periodic table. She enjoyed it far more. She said base sequences, and Masato froze, the words striking him like lightning. He crumpled to the floor, the room erupting in shocked gasps, and a crushing urge to quit slammed into him. Manipulating base sequences was way over his head. He couldn't just rip DNA apart and rebuild its building blocks on a whim. The dream of steaming, mouth-watering rice evaporated into a cruel, distant mirage. I saw it at once, concern flaring, and asked if he was all right. Masato admitted he hadn't felt distressed since his corporate days. He burned through hours, eyes glued to the computer's cold glow. Memories slammed into him, snapping his thoughts straight to his old work laptop. A bolt of inspiration slammed into him. He snatched up the supercomputer, throwing his last hope into its circuits to smash the crisis. The moment he activated it, an app with a DNA symbol flashed open, and the genome editor sprang to life, barking at him to hold the living thing up to the camera, scan it, then hit enter. Masato hoisted a blade of grass, and the screen exploded to life, revealing its base sequence. Himawari gaped, blindsided by the tool's hidden power, and the sylph snapped, "What's our next move?" Masato tore through the guide, and discovered they could rewrite the scanned organism's traits. They cracked the code. Suddenly they could stretch size, repaint colors, and reshape composition. Heart-pounding, I blurted an eager plan: dye the rice green and shape it into Nalin-sized portions. Masato shut it down, saying it would be way too hard to cook. Make it just slightly bigger, and it could blast open a whole new set of possibilities. Next, he locked onto perfecting the rice's stickiness and springy chew. That meant dialing the starch levels. He hunched over the sample, eyes widening as the readout slammed down: 70% starch, a jaw-dropping 95% amylose to 5% amylopectin. Because it so closely matched Japanese rice, he declared it promising. Panic clawed at me, and I demanded to know why the ratio mattered. Musato declared that amylose and amylopectin, two starch rivals, control rice's stickiness. Lots of amylose makes grains pull apart, while lots of amylopectin makes them cling together when cooked. I was completely baffled about what to do with the ratio. Masato called it a good question. They decided to whip up several variants. Wari agreed, insisting they taste each one to pick the champion for large-scale production, while Masato urged calm as their excitement threatened to boil over. Masato unleashed 4 rice variants, dialing amylose and amylopectin levels to sculpt wildly different textures. He tapped the file extension and date exactly as the silt had instructed, and the laptop flared to life, spilling tiny orbs of light into the air. Masato's gaze snapped to the glowing orbs and he blurted, "Are those the nucleotide sequence?" Brimming with certainty, she summoned her sisters, who tore into the light orbs like snacks. Masato and Himawari gaped as the others snatched the worms and chomped them with obscene, ravenous relish. The leader barked, "Everyone understand." They roared yes. Masato's eyes snapped open as he realized every time they ate the light they were swapping genetic data. Preparations complete, Masato strode forward and held the rice plants aloft for the silks. He barked for them to reshape the plants to mirror the 4 variants he'd designed on his laptop. The sults poured their magic into the rice, finishing the task in a heartbeat and making the Sato spring to life. He grinned with gratitude and declared the only thing left was to get the rice growing. Before he planted a single seed, Masato unleashed magic across the floating island, and in moments whole stretches of earth flooded over, snapping into shining, water-filled rice paddies. I froze, baffled at first, then Masato sliced through the mystery. These were fields carved out just for growing rice. With a crackle of magic, he reshaped the land, turning stubborn dirt into rich, ready soil. Masato and the girls sank the rice seedlings into the steaming new paddies. He summoned the silps, forcing them to unleash their familiar clouds. The silt summoned clouds that rained a living magic, jolting growth into overdrive until the rice exploded into full maturity in an instant, ready for harvest. Masato's jaw dropped. They looked exactly like the Japanese rice he remembered. Himawari pointed out the grains were bigger and unmistakably different from before. Her hands flew as she built the rice bowl, pulse racing to taste the new flavor. Masato warned it was too soon, but a grin split his face. He was every bit as excited. He hurtled to the factory to process the rice, heart racing and clinging to one desperate hope: good results. Later, he unleashed a kitchen assault and cooked all 4 rice types. Masato flashed a satisfied grin. The rice hit the mark. The girls surged forward, buzzing to try it and shouting, "Who gets the first taste?" Masato snatched up the first variant and tasted it. The instant it hit his tongue, a tidal wave of emotion crashed through him. At last, the flavor he'd hunted with every scrap of his soul since his reincarnation. Himawari devoured the Chuni's rice, and the quiet cook chewing beside her froze in disbelief. They had actually made something this delicious. Masato bit into the rice and knew instantly it was legs better than before. It clung a touch too stubbornly. He insisted on testing a variant with extra amylose. I know he swore this one was already bursting with flavor. The self hungered to taste the other variants. They dove headfirst into the remaining varieties, tasting each one. The self thundered that every last one was delicious. I know Worry pressed Masato, asking which he preferred. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then locked his decision on the variant Amylose 17. They raved its flavor was brand-worthy, able to stand toe-to-toe with the legendary Kashi Hikari rice. Hinori and the silt pressed him about Koshi Hikari. Masato shrugged them off, sneering that it wasn't important, they wouldn't know it anyway. He then tasked the self with turning every rice seedling into Amylose 17 so they could cultivate it in bulk. The self vowed she'd handle it. Masato stood riveted as she wove magic into the rice plants, the scientist in him buzzing with exhilaration at the raw potential of selective breeding. His imagination ignited as he plotted bold upgrades for crops, pest-proof strains and onions you could slice without a single tear, breakthroughs impossible in his old world. A bolt of inspiration hit him and he blurted it out. The startled Jules asked, "What's wrong?" And Masato announced he'd thought of something extraordinary. He cranked up that luxurious ingredient he'd remembered. He pitched a bold plan to improve Matsutake, a rare, costly mushroom prized for its potent aroma and rich flavor. Because it couldn't be farmed, it remained painfully scarce. Masato proclaimed that selective breeding could unleash a tidal wave of Matsutake. I'm wary, and I realized this would explode into a bounty of mouthwatering dishes. With the last bite gone, the group burst out the door into the open air. I whooped with delight when I realized those mushrooms grew in the mountains and vowed I'd hunt them down. Masato remembered charging into those mountains to forage wild vegetables, scanning the riot of plants for any hiding Matsutake mushrooms. Her excitement hit him like a flare. He grinned, certain we'd be the ones to find it. The girl reset the dining table, steeled herself, and ate again. Masato snapped at them to settle and tidy up first, his gaze zeroing in on a nearby tree. He felt instinct flare and locked onto it as a Japanese red pine. Microscopic vision blazing, he scanned the bark, found hidden mats, and snatched the shimmering mycelium threads. They spring up only around those pines. With a flick of alchemy, he whipped up a swab, plucked a small branch, and declared that combining mycelium with pinewood would let him cultivate an enhanced Matsutake. Then he asked the eager girls to stow the bowls. Back home, Masato slammed into his chair, powered up his laptop, and plunged straight into the genome editor. He slammed the Matsutake's genetic data into his rig and ripped open its nutrient absorption blueprint. His gaze snapped to checkboxes stamped saprophytic and mycorrhizal, and he turned to the puzzled girls to explain those labels named the rare Matsutake's mycelium. He watched mushrooms split into two camps, saprophytic ones that devour decayed trees and leaves and can be cultivated, and mycorrhizal latch onto living tree roots, siphoning nutrients while staying wild and uncultivated. Mycorrhizal mushrooms, Matsutake among them, refused to be farmed, so Masato pitched a bold plan: convert Matsutake into saprophytic types to simplify cultivation. Dread slammed into me. I realized this could spark mass Matsutake production, and the sylphs told Masato to entrust the rest to them. Masato slammed the edited data into place, and the sylphs amplified the mycelium. He hauled the enhanced mycelium into the floating island's ultimate greenhouse, cranked in growth accelerators, and unleashed an explosive surge of development. He ripped the mycelium into spawn, chopping it into chunky pieces that looked just like wood. Himawari's eyes went wide and she blurted, "How does wood help mushrooms grow?" Masato leaned in and laid bare the vital role the Japanese red pine branches played. He plunged it into the soil, drenched it with a growth accelerator, summoned blessed rain clouds, and compressed 30 years of growth into a single instant. In a heartbeat, the branch erupted into a towering, rock-solid tree. Masato grew 7 more logs and slammed them together into a tight, side-by-side row. He threw his arms wide and bellowed, "The mushroom farm is ready." Drills screaming, they bored deep holes into the logs, shoved the mushroom spawn into each cavity, then stacked the inoculated logs into a tight, deliberate formation. They summoned the centipede assembly. At last they unleashed rain laced with growth accelerators. Mushrooms erupted instantly as the mycelium flipped into caps popping out of the logs one by one, and I stood gaping as the sulfur joist vanished beneath a tide of fungus. Masato barked for them to start harvesting on the spot, and after they'd finished collecting, he called on the self to summon rain again. 2 harvest cycles thundered past. They amassed a monstrous stash of maths to ferry mushrooms for Hemwari, turning it into an all-you-can-eat frenzy with 276 mushrooms counted. Masato declared there was more than enough for everyone. Gratitude exploded from him as he thanked the girls for their help. Masato flashed a grin and ordered the thrilled Silt to brace for the feast. He tossed aside gadgets, chose plain charcoal grilling, and with a flash of his super alchemy skill, conjured a grill from scratch. He conjured pure carbon wood and beer. Masato seized the carbon-witous charcoal and, with a single surge of power, ripped the alcohol clean out of the beer. He unleashed a blistering burst of fire magic, and the grill erupted into roaring flames. "You unfurl the mats you're taking." He unleashed purification magic, scouring the grime and shearing away the stubborn stem base. He slashed the mushroom cap, split it cleanly in 2, etched shallow scores across the top, then dusted it with a pinch of salt. Mid-sizzle at the grill, he suddenly slammed up a shimmering barrier. I know exactly where he froze, startled, and asked, "Why?" A 5-layered barrier shimmered above the mushrooms as they cooked. Himawari sneered that only Masato would cook with such magic. Unsure she was right, Masato stood transfixed as the mushrooms oozed juices. Minutes later, they were ready, gleaming and mouthwatering. Even I could see it, and I knew he'd asked to eat. Masato held them back and unveiled a secret ritual to savor them. He ripped the mushroom along the earlier cut to show how, then chomped into it. Steam hit him and blew his mind. He bit down and his eyes shot open. The texture and flavor nearly wrung tears of joy from him. A cold wariness prickled through me at his glacial eating, and she asked if it could possibly be that delicious. She sank her teeth in and cried out at the sheer deliciousness, then scrambled for words to pin down the flavor. Masato grinned and shouted, 10 more mushrooms on the grill, and beers for dinner. Everyone whooped, their joyful voices echoing into the night. By the next sunrise, Masato shot back to the floating island and plunged straight into tending the rice paddies once more. Drowsy and home-weary, he growled about the pre-dawn rice work. His restless self spat gibberish, then Masato thanked them for joining us. He declared his mission to grow a Milost 17 rice to perfection. To secure enough seeds, he had to hunt down more seed potatoes. His eyes lit up. A bumper rice harvest meant they could feast on endless rice dishes. The girls snapped to attention, shedding their sluggishness. Silt sprang forward, eagerly vowing to give her very best. Surprised by their vigor, Masato oversaw a bountiful harvest. At the factory, he shoved rice into the thresher. It spat out a tally, 6,000 and 3 grains, enough for roughly 1,500 plants, and Masato grimaced, saying they still needed more rice seeds. He tasked the girls using the area as a base with planting extra seedlings to swell their harvest. On the floating island, he slammed out antiphysical barrier magic, hammering the air into a colossal box that loomed over the fields. He staked it out as the rice seed bed, then unleashed water magic to flood it with water chilled to 10 degrees C and laced with powder. After 10 days, he cranked the water up to 30 degrees and waited 12 tense hours for seed germination to kick off. Panic tight in my throat, I asked if we'd plant in the usual spot, and Masato snapped, "Not this time, it's going to be different." He cast an enchantment over another field, brandishing specially treated rice soil as he explained how the crop would take root. They scattered the seeds, and when blessed rain spiked with a whisper of growth accelerator hammered the paddies, the rice shot up to 15 centimeters. Masato barked at the sulfs, ripped the seedlings from the earth, bind them into bundles of 4, and plunged them straight into the paddies. Masato and him moved as one, their skills snapping into flawless sync. After planting, they self-summoned blessed rain that fused with a growth accelerator, and the rice swelled into golden heads and was swept in for harvest. They ran the cycle 2 more times, shoved the crop into the factory thresher, and Masato's fingers flew as he tallied over 960 million grains. Enough to sow 1,600 hectares, he proclaimed the seed was more than enough, and the coming harvest would yield food. He slammed the horn like a battle cry. The girls erupted into a wild cheer. Masato blurted, "Are you fatigued?" and they swore they could push on. He grinned at their iron stamina, then snapped a warning, "Don't overexert yourselves or you'll collapse." The next day he barreled back in and bellowed that this was the final day to plant the rice. He ripped a massive magic circle into existence, its runes igniting into a blinding storm. In an instant, most fields snapped into glistening paddies. They rallied everyone into a desperate, all-out planting, and minutes later the rice stood ripe and ready for harvest. Sweeping the fields with a razor gaze, Masato roared praise for their tireless, back-breaking work. But he stared as the colossal harvesting task loomed before him. A bolt of inspiration slammed into this dress. He slipped away in silence, then fired off a frantic call after him. Masato zeroed in and didn't utter a word. He shot his hand up to trigger his special great architecture skill, and a colossal building sprang into being in an instant. Inside, the girl froze, hooked by its unique design, and demanded to know his purpose. Masato ripped off the disguise and revealed the place was a vehicle manufacturing factory he'd forged with his space-time tuning skill. He left him stunned and on edge as the machines snapped together at lightning speed. In minutes, the combined harvester snapped into place, fully assembled. I pressed him, and Masato revealed it was an iQuip machine built to collect rice autonomously. The harvester rumbled across the field on its own. The girls gaped, eyes wide with baffled disbelief. The next morning, Masato slept like a log until Himawari shook him awake. He bolted upright and demanded, "What's happening?" Amara's mother suddenly announced she wanted to visit. Masato was fine with it, but curiosity ignited. Why this sudden interest? Himawari made it clear. Her mother craved his cooking, clutching the memory of that one special meal and desperate to savor it again. The warrior burned to tell her mother immediately, but Masato barked for her to hold off. Then he tapped the sills and reached the warrior's mother. He scrambled to send her a surprise the moment she said she'd visit, and he and Wary's mother stood there, baffled at first. Masato slammed his will into the silps and funneled a blazing surge of enhancement magic straight into her. She gasped as a sudden surge of strength ripped through her. Masato explained it originated in the last 4 hours and 30 minutes. A flush of gratitude lit her face at his thoughtfulness. Masato waved it off. No trouble, and Himwari's mother immediately announced she'd be over right away. Right after the call, Sato barked that it was time to prepare, and I, heart racing, blurted, "What are you going to cook?" Misada shot back, "We can make plenty, our pantry's overflowing with ingredients." The moment her mother stepped through the door, a mouth-watering wave of food yanked her toward the kitchen. Misada grinned, perfect timing. A steaming plate of matsutake rice and miso mayo stir-fry slid onto the table. Hannah Worry froze, wide-eyed at the unfamiliar dish. They pressed around the table, voices lifting into one powerful, grateful chorus. Masato scooped a taste, and his grin erupted. The mise mayo blasted the creation's clean, pure sweetness into a dazzling rush. Wary at first, she took a cautious taste and instantly got hooked, and her mother agreed. Masada beamed when they raved about his cooking, then thrust a steaming bowl of matsutake rice toward them, insisting they try it. He declared it flawless, and Himewari gushed that the mushroom's aroma and soy sauce had seeped into every grain of rice. Her mother's jaw dropped. She was every bit as impressed. Masato hunted down the finest ingredients and obsessed over every flavor until each bite sang. Her mother, seeing his tireless effort, met him with a knowing, grateful smile. They kept tearing into their food, while Jame Worry crowed about Masato's talents. Right after the meal, Worry churned in my gut. She admitted it was her first time trying dishes like these, and every bite was delicious. Her mother's eyes misted. Back in the human world, the best cooks were crowned royal chefs. She urged Masato to go after it, but he shook his head and bowed out with a polite smile. He braced for his mom's bewildered stare the moment she discovered the hidden chef he'd been hiding. Masato cracked a smile and said he'd be satisfied if Japanese cuisine blew up here so more people could savor it. He knew one thing: to send his food far and wide, he had to become a true chef. He clung to the hope that someone would step up and help him pull it off. Meanwhile, at a nearby market, vendors' eyes snapped to a girl weaving between the stalls. She clung to that one stubborn remark, her chef dream, and he pitied her. If that cruel setback hadn't derailed her, she'd be a pro right now. She lost her left arm and watched every dream she'd built shatter in an instant. The day after dining with Himewari's mother, Masato pushed through the guild doors to hawk his harvest. The old appraiser waited in the guild's warehouse, and Carol had caught wind that Masato had hauled in fresh crops and exotic seasonings. Masato's eyes gleamed as he confirmed he'd trapped them inside magic cards. Crops erupted from the soil one by one, each stalk springing to life. First up, carrots, jam-packed with ultra-beta-carotene, blitz away wrinkles and smooth your skin. Those special onions turbocharged the immune system, tore bacteria and viruses to pieces, and stripped poisons and curses of their power. Tranquility unravels into yams, exploding into spelled anger, anxiety, and stress. Holy burdock turbocharged digestion and ignited fat burning, melting pounds away. Masato slammed a taro down, temporarily boosting every stat by 10 and igniting their physical and magical strength. Finally, his rice wine annihilated purines, letting him fart in peace. Gout didn't stand a chance. Masato slammed a bottle of vinegar onto the table and unleashed a tonic that turbocharged HP and MP recovery 100-fold. The old man staggered back, jaw dropping as he took in crops and seasonings so flawless they felt impossible. He scoffed that taro could jack up stats. Masato waved it away, shrinking the boost to a pitiful blip. Carol's eyes snapped to the yam, a miracle that erased negative emotions, and she knew Masato Muse, the psychiatrist from his old world, would be floored. He exploded, demanding to know why the appraisal skill slapped the yans and carrots with such absurd names. Masada's grin widened as he pulled out more and thrust a steaming dish he'd cooked toward them. "Try this," he dared. Carol stared, baffled he'd bothered to cook for himself. Masato said raw ingredients would bury their quality. Cooking makes it shine. He shoved the steaming dish at them, daring them to taste it and judge whether it could sell. He slid a steaming plate of matsutake fried rice across the table, its heady aroma flooding the room, then revealed a bold amisabi's dish. The old man tasted the miso dish. Tears sprang to his eyes. Its flavor stunned him, and he discovered it fought cancer. Carol gushed that the rice was gloriously chewy and packed with mushroom flavor. Their delight lit a fire in Masada. He swore he'd produce even more. Carol pressed her palms together and thanked him for the meal, the old man's jaw dropping as he marveled at Masato's crop enhancements. One guy kept crowing the ultimate farmer at him over and over. Masato, cheeks blazing, begged him to stop. The old man kept pressing, jaw agape. Masato had coaxed over 100 rare matsutake mushrooms from a single log, shattering nature's limits. Masato spread a mountain of produce across the stall, and Carol's worry cut through the air as she demanded, "Are you really going to sell all of this?" The old man barked at Carol, demanding she funnel every sale through coal. Carol swore she'd hand over every last thing the moment she walked back through the door. A memory hit Masato. He slammed 70-plus movement use cards into Carol's hands, relief sparking through him at first. Cards cascaded from Carol's hands. She scrambled to grab them as the old man barked that those items shouldn't be handled lightly. Nervous Carol snapped she'd alert the staff instantly. Masato felt the urgency slam into him, but couldn't buy they'd move that quickly. The old man revealed Cole's magical tracker that pins down lost items, and Masato snapped, "Do you know where Cole is now?" Masato saw the guild desperate to offload surplus, thrust the cards into their hands, and sparked a lightning-fast sell-off. Carol's excitement explodes as he fires off the sales update. They swore they'd flip it on the double and come back with the report. Masato thanked them. As he turned to leave, he vowed he'd get the next crop batch ready. The old man leaned in, spinning theories about Masato's next daring gambit, and Carol cracked a grin that echoed his hungry anticipation. Masato flashed a grin and urged them to stay tuned. He'd already locked in his next project. The next day, Masato and Himawari burst into a new place, and Masato poured his thanks straight at her. She steered him into the towering sugar cane, the stalks closing in like a living wall. A warrior demanded his purpose, and Masato grinned, declaring he'd craft yet another seasoning.